to order. All three commissioners are present virtually. And our first order of business is we are going to be, this morning, we're going to be talking with the Building and Code Compliance Director, Lynn Ward. We're going to continue our discussion regarding short-term rentals. Good morning, Commissioner Christopher. I see you now. And we will start. You want to, I guess, lead us off a little bit? I'll just repeat what I said earlier about this. This was a lot of work, not just this one, but all of the topics today. And I really appreciate that, Lynn. You definitely provided us seemingly with all the information we would ever need to make an informed decision, if not at least a discussion today. So I don't know if you want to kind of provide a synopsis, perhaps for folks on the phone or on the Zoom meeting. So I will turn it over to you, Ms. Ward.
All right. This is Lynn Ward with the Building Inspection and Compliance Department. Commissioner Anderson asked me to do some homework on several topics to facilitate discussions of how maybe we can do a few changes in our county to help some situations that are not unique to just Klickitat County, but other areas as well. Some of those who have already done some of this of what we're talking about today. So that provided a lot of documentation, as Dave referenced. There was plenty of documentation that I provided just to give a lot of background, because it may save Klickitat County some time in doing the same type of research. We can perhaps utilize what other counties and jurisdictions have done. Basically, short-term rentals, they come up frequently, and our understanding in the past was that they could only be looked at as commercial, but in doing the research, it became apparent that some areas continue to look at them as a residential property, not a commercial property, unless it becomes a venue. And there is a House bill in RCW language pertaining to short-term rentals that we can utilize because it is already out there at the state level. So we provided a few examples of verbiage that we could adopt just to be changed, or however we want to customize it for Klickitat County, but it was a document to have discussion from, better than having a blank piece of paper. So that's kind of the origination of the short-term rental discussions, and we can go from there.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm going to just start with, I'm going to open it up to my seatmates if you had any comments or observations or anything before we kind of dive in. Commissioner Anderson, since you were kind of the adopter, the initiator, I guess, of this really in-depth conversation.
So I guess this started out when we look at where Lynn's code compliance violations come from. We know that the things that we're talking about today are issues that if we can get ahead of, it'll make code compliance easier. In District 1, we have a lot of short-term rentals, and we're probably going to have more in the future. We don't actually know how many we have, but we know there's a bunch out there because we know we're getting the tax revenue from it and the tourism tax dollars. So, and it's increasing rapidly. Dave McClure know better the numbers in terms of how much income we're bringing in. It was hard for me to reconcile for the last few years that we're taking them dollars, but in essence, we're not saying that they're legal. So the easiest way I thought was to go the way, kind of this way the city of White Salmon and Skamania went, where we're starting simple. We want to keep it simple, allow people to do short-term rentals, but we need to have the numbers and then a way so that we can contact these people if there are issues and that, you know, whatever is coming in. So as all things, I try to keep things as simple as possible. And I think Lynn did a great job designing this draft so that it would be simple.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christopher, any comments or issues?
No, if this turns out to be simple, I would be surprised, but it's a start. So no comments yet.
Okay. I had a couple comments. I guess I would make. I would agree that I think I would much rather find a simple way that people can be compliant, because we know we have this activity going on in the county now. If nothing else, all you have to do is do a search on Airbnb or VRBO, and there are places available in Klickitat, in unincorporated Klickitat County right now. I mean, I haven't been booking anything because I live here, so why would I? But there are folks doing this. It is definitely evidence that, because our lodging tax receipts have gone up significantly in the last couple 3 years. The trend, is actually really accelerating, and so I think that's a good thing. But it raise the issue of, we're taking the tax money, but these are really not legal from a county perspective right now, unless we make some changes. And I do want to make it simple and clear. I do like the white salmon. I was, between white salmon and Skamania County, some kind of model like that. I did have some questions, and I do see we have some other folks on too. I recognize planning department's number, but I'll start with Lynn. Do we know? So I guess first question is, how are we really treating these now? Do we just sort of ignore it? Do we not, unless there's a complaint as far as from a neighbor? We don't really regulate it now?
We're not regulating it basically at all. If we do a pre-sub meeting, the various departments let them know what we would require. And it's always been based upon being considered commercial, for road work, turnarounds, sprinkler systems, all of that. There's a different angle that perhaps we can look at, but as of now, we don't really regulate them, permit them. If I get a complaint on them, we let them know that, short-term rentals aren't approved, and try to get it, to not be a short-term rental. Most people, they'll just say, well, I'll just pay the 3 citations and keep doing it. Yeah, it's not a perfect solution, but that's kind of where it's been.
Okay. Yeah, kind of a process question for my seatmates, and actually either you, Lynn, or if Mochi's on, or somebody from the planning department. I noticed both. Actually, I didn't really notice in the white salmon kind of the chain of events, but definitely in Skamania, Kitsap model, they had a pretty extensive public process as far as these went through it went to their planning commission. They had hearings. The planning commission made recommendations, which then the board of commissioners had some hearings and made it, and adopted it. I don't want to say I'm not in favor of that necessarily, but I also, I guess that my question is that necessary? I mean, would be, could we, I would be fine, I think, depending on what my seatmates think, with, kind of starting the process, the public process with the board, meaning we have kind of a draft and then get that out. I do want to have some pretty robust discussion with folks, because this is, if you're a neighbor and you're, there's some concerns. I liked kind of the safeguards that were kind of put in. I love the, here's your good neighbor policy, which again, we shouldn't have to actually tell people, but unfortunately we do. I was thinking, looking at all these, the breadth of all of this is that 95% of what we do is trying to legislate ways for people to be good neighbors to each other. We wouldn't need anything, if people weren't ornery and cause trouble. So I guess it's a question, and maybe this would be to whoever, as far as it maybe even legal counsel too. I'm hopeful that we can do that. We don't have to necessarily go through the planning commission process and a recommendation to the board. Commissioner Christopher.
Yeah, I would hope, and I would second that. I would hope that we could come up with some kind of a draft. I still want to have public hearings and public input, and then we can, change, modify the draft and move from there. I don't think all of the hoops that were jumped through are necessarily needed for this, in my opinion.
Right.
Well, and I think the great thing is that we're not reinventing the wheel here, and because other jurisdictions have done all those other hoops, we can just incorporate those by reference, which Lynn has already kind of done.
Okay.
So I would personally be in favor of just having this go through the board and having 2 hearings, at 2 different times, one during our regular meeting or something, and one during an evening meeting to take testimony that we could then send back to Lynn. There are a few things in here that we haven't dealt with that Skamania did. One of them is Skamania, I think they took their ADU ordinance from us originally in the first place, and then they got on the short-term rental ordinance first, and then in our ADU, in their ADU ordinance, there is no short-term rentals are allowed within an ADU, where I think that kind of a decision needs to be in the short-term rental ordinance area, not in that ordinance on the ADUs. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah.
Skamania County did that from them.
Right. And
Yeah.
I agree with that. We need to, I would agree that, I would think, my opinion, is we need to make the ADU available for rent, but I also think with the housing crisis we have in some areas, we need to make the main home and the ADU available for rent, not just one. That's a personal opinion.
Okay, that's a different conversation because I'm not.
I'm just floating it.
Right. No, that's fine. I know, and that might be appropriate now because that we have some time and track record with the ADU and how that's worked. That was one of the concessions that we made to folks when we initially adopted the ADU, was that because the idea was that the owner, it would be present on site, either in the main house or the ADU, I guess at least 6 months out of the year, because there was a lot of concern raised from folks that they were going to be both rentals and there would be nobody around. And if there was problems with the neighbors and whatnot, that there's really nobody to contact because they're absentee landlords. And
Right, but
sessions that we
in the short-term rental, if you only have one house and not 2 houses, you still have the same problem. So we're still trying to, it's the same thing. If you make the rental agreement for one house, you still have absentee landlords. You still have it. There's not a whole lot of difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, valid point. And I think we have some track record now too to show that the ADUs have not been the scourge that some folks thought they were going to be. Me, not obviously. I was a proponent of them. I'm actually surprised they haven't been more utilized than they have. I don't know. Last time I checked, our number there, we have very few of them countywide.
I got one.
Yeah, well, you're one of the chosen few. So.
My in-laws live in one.
Yeah, no, that's what they're for. So, okay, well, that would be something to bring up. I guess the question then back to the adoption process, because sometimes, although I would argue that the planning, when they are having hearings and they are going through planning work, it's really the delegated authority of the Board of Commissioners that they are utilizing. And so it seems like, and I don't know, as I said, I see 570 on here, so that I know that's the planning department's number. So if Mochi or Lori or whoever's listening from the planning department is now frantically running around with their hair on fire, I would like to hear that.
Good morning. This is Mochi with Planning Department.
Yes. Good morning, Mochi.
So we do have to amend our zoning ordinance One is in terms of the ADU provisions, because we do have, currently has the regulations in the ADU section stating that no short-term rentals is allowed if the parcel has an ADU there. So whether that's the primary residence or the ADU, either one we can allow short-term rentals. So if we, have this new ordinance in place, we'll need to amend our zoning code. And in terms of allowing the process for the commissioners to make a decision on that, we also need to have provision in our zoning code to specify if we are going to process the application for short-term rental, then we have to reference that will need to go through a separate process, meaning they do not require to go through the conditional use permit process, but instead for this, soon to be created short-term rental provisions.
So to the question that I raised about if we, just for both the amending the zoning ordinance and then also adopting a short-term rental, potentially doing that, do we have to go through our traditional, planning commission? They have hearings, they make a draft, they make a recommendation to the board, or can we, in a sense, skip that step and start the process with the board's part of the process?
I will need to look into that a little bit further, but for right now, I believe we'll have to go through the planning commission because a part of that process is to amend the zoning code. And anytime we change anything within the zoning ordinance, we have to go through the planning commission process because of the 3670, Growth Management Act and all those requirements, the Planning Enabling Act requirement.
Okay. Okay. Well, do some
Well, I
more
would
check.
imagine then we could still get a draft of our thoughts and ideas and give them that to work with. But back to the ADU, if we're gonna have to go into the ADU regulations to open up a possibility of a rental there's a couple other things I would like to bring up why we have the ADU open when that gets around to it anyway.
Okay.
So
I mean,
if we do, so I see this as two things. Number one is the ordinance allowing for the legality and the process for the short-term rentals. And then we have the zoning and the ADU. Do those have to go at one time? Can those go separately? That's another question, Mochi.
I believe we don't have to make that be like one project, although it will be good to have the public to, voice their opinions on that. Because for the short-term rental, in terms of amending the zoning ordinance, I guess we can kind of do it similar to recreational marijuana. We can just amend the definition in the code and, clearly stated that if the land use is for short-term rentals, then we refer to, another title of the county code. For the ADU, we do have to go through that process just to make that clear that short-term rental is, applicable to all parcels within the unincorporated county. And we won't single out those parcels that have an ADU attached to it, because those parcels will not be qualified for the short-term rental as is with the current code provisions.
Right. So if I understand what you're saying, even if we, if you have a parcel that has an ADU on it, you couldn't, any structure, the main house or the ADU right now would not be available. It's not even the question of, do you have short-term rental in the ADU? You couldn't have short-term rental at all because it's prohibited now if you have an ADU on your parcel. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So then theoretically, we can do the short-term rental part, but any ADU stuff would have to go through the planning commission.
Yes, if we want to amend the ADU section of the zoning ordinance, we have to go through planning commission.
Right.
So we can do the rest of the legwork then go planning commission and then amend whatever we come up with for short-term rentals if we wanted to include ADU. So we can do our thing here and just not have ADU as a post-it note on the side, and then send it to the planning commission to deal with the ADU part, and then amend whatever we come up with, is my understanding.
Is that correct? Can we do a short-term rental that ordinance or whatever without going through the planning commission process?
That I would like some additional time to look into it further. I'm sorry, I can't give you like a quick response right at this moment.
All right. Okay, those were all my process questions I had thought of ahead of time. I mean, we can actually get into the draft. I mean, we got lots of time, so I guess that'd be my first question, even though it's kind of is the side little post-it note. What are our thoughts about allowing ADUs? Because that you could use either the ADU or the main house or both, as Mr. Christopher has suggested, for short-term rental. I'm just curious where the board. I mean, Dan's already kind of.
I thought I read in one of them that you could use the ADU, and in another one, I thought I read you could use both. When I read through the documents, could be wrong, but that's the way I thought I read one of the various options out there.
Right. No, I think you're right, because I think in Skamania County, if I'm remembering right, they do. You can do short-term rental in ADUs. I'm just curious, we don't have to do it like Skamania. We'll do it our
Well,
own.
and that's what I said. So, I mean, there's three of us here. I mean, figure out how people want to do that, and we'll make that as our note on what we want to add to ours or not add to ours. You kind of know where I'm at. So wherever you guys are at kind of leads to kind of what we want to put in the draft.
Right.
Commissioners, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Lisa Evans.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, I've been listening in. I've got to get on another call in a few minutes. And I'm sorry for the background noise. But if you don't mind, I just wanted to say a couple of things. I've been working with STRs for about 8 years now, and I'm now also on the advisory committee as far as our tax dollars go, and where they go for tourism and that type of thing. So, I hear what you guys are saying right now. It sounds like some process questions need to be fixed. Just backing up a little bit, I watch the numbers every year. And I think overall, our county has done a really great job with short-term rentals. I was involved with White Salmon's process for coming up with their regulations. I talked to the mayor just last week and asked her how things were going. She said very well. There's always people that you end up with a little bit of trouble with, but overall, they felt that their ordinance for short-term rentals is going really well, their process. And I absolutely agree with you guys that simple is the best way to go. Let's see, I'm just looking at my notes here, sorry. Just keeping it really simple, just because we really don't have a problem, posting things like good neighbor guidelines, and then like a self-certifying inspection to ensure that basic safety things like fire extinguishers and smoke alarms are in the units is really good. I do want to caution you on looking at the numbers for this last year due to COVID. We've had some real anomalies in the people that we've had coming to short-term rentals. So just, when you talk about trends of numbers going up, I would just caution you on remembering that this past year has definitely been different than other years. Also, the majority of short-term rentals fall within the boundaries of White Salmon, which are already regulated. Across the board, if you get onto Airbnb in our whole county at any one time, you may only see, 20 STRs available, and at the top of our season, a little over 100. So considering that's our whole county, that's not really a lot. So I think as a people, we are doing a really good job of, if somebody has space available, that they're using it, and trying to open up to other people. But I think a lot of people in our county also like to protect their privacy. And so I don't think, coming up with these regulations, we're going to see all of a sudden a lot of STRs all of a sudden explode all across the county. So no, I think keeping it simple is best. I think we've done a great job at policing ourselves so far. And so I just kind of wanted to throw that in there. And just that, white salmons has been working great. My last point would be, I just ask that you also protect the operators as much as you protect the guests. I do know some instances where people have tried to do STRs and their neighbors have spoken up and just wreaked havoc. And so the people have just given up on doing the STR, and I don't think that's fair. So, I think the regulation of the STR can be fairly simple, but also just make sure that there's a process in place for due process for both the operators and for both the neighbors, that there's a fair due process and appeals process. So I thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm open to that at any time, just because of my experience with short-term rentals.
So I did have a question, Lisa. This is Dave Sauter. As far as because I'm really interested in the comment you made about, protecting the operators, from the neighbors, because I think there's provisions in some of the examples we looked at, if there's, you get one complaint, you get two, you get a warning. After the third one, you may end up getting shut down. What's been your experience, since you have experience as an operator or work with operators? What when you talk about due process, what do you think would be a good process to have for that? Because you do have, I know of situations, not necessarily with short-term rentals, but with anything where, neighbors love to use processes as weapons. We get pulled into really what our neighbors don't like each other, and so they're going to just cause trouble for each other. And so any thoughts or suggestions about how we could come up with a process that we legitimately, if you got operators that are bad actors that are not, there's wild parties at their things, and it really is a problem. Those we want to punish, but the one where they got Gladys Kravitz living, down the road, that just, every time somebody drives in or out, they're filing a complaint.
Right. So it definitely goes both ways. One, you're always going to have bad hosts, and that's a good thing with these platforms like VRBO and Airbnb. If you get bad reviews, you're going to end up getting booted off a platform, and nobody's going to rent with you anyways. So you have somebody that has your back, essentially. I'm kind of a firm believer of the 3 strikes and you're out. Sometimes hosts make legitimate mistakes, and I think there should be a fair opportunity for them to, receive the information that somehow that there's been a complaint or that they've done something wrong, and they should be allowed to fix it. And then the operator should also be should be encouraged to keep a journal or, some kind of record, so that when neighbors do complain, they should write it down. They should be aware of who has complained against them. It's a lot of times neighbors just run to the county and complain. They won't complain to the operator face to face. I think there should be a record somewhere of, who has made the complaint, the date of the complaint, what exactly the complaint was, and then have that recorded. And then you can begin to see sort of a record of, you know, is this neighbor, do they have a legitimate complaint, or are they just going to be that problem person, you know? And, you know, and that's a really good question. If the neighbor is just going to continue to complain, I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more on, so whose rights dictate then, right? Does the homeowner who wants to rent out, you know, if they're legitimately doing everything right, can they keep going? You know, it's sort of like people who buy properties near an airport and then they complain all the time about the airplanes. I mean, you know, at some point we just have to be real, and they just have to deal with it, you know? So yeah, so first I would start with sort of like the, you know, 3 strikes, and you're out type of thing, you know, with an appeals process. And then, like I said, I think operators should be encouraged to keep a record of, and be aware of when the neighbors have complained, what exactly the complaint is, and then we can see the trend as to whether it really is a realistic complaint or not.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. That's something we deal with in code I mean, across the
Oh, yes.
it's you got.
Right, and you know, and that's the thing too. I know you guys have been working with the nuisance ordinance, and I thought these could almost work hand in hand, right? Whatever, you know, a lot of the issues you have with dealing with nuisances, I mean, complaints, you know, from STR sort of fall under the same vein. So, you know, so those will definitely cross over.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Commissioner Christopher, you had your hand raised.
No, I want to thank Lisa for her comments. That it brings up another kind of enforcement of complaints, just like she said, and how we want to handle those, so you don't have just one grumpy neighbor constantly complaining. And whether, I mean, who hears that complaint, who decides on which side? Are we going to hear those, or are we going to want to set up a board of short-term rental people that are half short-term rental people and half citizens that would then hear that complaint? Or, you know, they can monitor themselves. We don't necessarily have to. But my point is, like she said, if you have it at 3 strikes, you're out. Your neighbor doesn't like your operation, you're soon out of business. So we've got to fix that, because they will complain for the sake of complaining.
Right. Yeah, because you are going to end up, because I noticed, I don't remember if it was Kitsap, I think it was Kitsap, or it might have been Skamania County's survey results, where, you know, 15% of the population was just adamantly opposed to the whole idea. And we are going to have that. We are going to have.
If you have one of those living on your street, you're in trouble.
Right. Does that mean that you shouldn't be able to do it because your neighbor that's adamantly opposed to you doing it can, you know, just file 3 complaints and then, oh, they're shut down and they're gone?
That's, I said, you've got to have some kind of a hearing process that somewhere in there, both sides bring it before a board or a committee or something, and the committee decides whether the complaint's valid and goes as a check, or isn't valid and doesn't go as a check. And I don't know that we necessarily want to hear that argument, so then we would then place somebody else in charge of hearing that argument.
Right.
I don't want to hear it.
The
That's what I
issue is
said.
usually choice, right? I mean, that's in the end. Somebody may complain. You get those people who don't like a car driving down their street that is somebody they don't know. I mean, you have those people that are just always worried, and there's nothing we can do about that, because just owning a house, you can have different friends come over, and that's the same thing, as well as the noise. I mean, when you think about it, would you rather live next to a bunch of 22-year-olds who party every weekend, or a short-term rental that might end up being a party once or twice a year? Which
Right.
one's going to be more detrimental to you?
Right, and that's my point. We could have, I mean, we already have a nuisance complaint board, do we not? We can always have them destined to hear, you know.
We haven't utilized them in a very long time.
We have one. We can make one. They
Yeah,
could be
that's
the
what they
people
said.
that hear those complaints and decide whether it's a valid complaint. What was that, Dave?
I said, that sounds like a real fun board.
Believe it or not, I have people that want to sit on that.
Wow. That's almost frightening, honestly.
But one of them used to work there, so
Yeah. That's where you want it. Yeah, maybe that's what you did. Maybe you have that board has a, you got, one or two of the grumpy neighbor types you put on there so they can kind of see that, oh, there's a lot of
short-term rental people and balance it out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we still never got through. I'm sorry. I let us wander off in the weeds as far as on the. So back to the ADU question. I'm curious. I know where Dan's at. I'm curious. I don't know where I'm at, frankly, at this moment. I'm just curious if Jake, if you had a really strong thought one way or the other.
Well, knowing how this is going to play out, I would say that we start with saying that, the ADU ordinance is not the right place to talk about short-term rentals or whatever. The ADU ordinance is a zoning ordinance that allows you to have a second, in essence, dwelling on a parcel of property. That's what that should be. My first thought would be is that if you have two dwellings on the same parcel of property, you would hope that one of those the landowner is living in, so people aren't just renting everything out. But that would more be the case within city limits. Being that we're in the rural area, you might want to have a little bit more leeway per se. And if we start by just eliminating that, where we'll probably end up through the settling and negotiation is that one of them could be rented out and the other one can't. That's just how I see it playing out. I do think, though, that we also need to have the discussion like we have Getaway, which is in an RV park ordinance, which is 48 units. We also have, the under canvas, which is a different piece of thing, but it's the same thing. We're hosting people, and that's 95 units. We might have smaller landowners that are local. I mean, because rather the only way to build something so large is really to bring in outside funders, dollars, and that. But say somebody wants to do something, and you see it on Airbnb all the time, tree houses and like really cool things that people are thinking about that somebody here locally might want to do. And they might need to do 4 or 5 of them in order to make that work. But having to go through the RV ordinance or some other ordinance, I don't think that's my first thought is if you want to have more than one short-term rental on your property, it should go through the conditional use process.
Isn't this more of a venue? Now
No,
we're
it's
back to
not necessarily a venue, but I also don't think that if you have a farm that used to have like 3 or 4 guest worker houses and you want to turn those into short-term rentals because the laws changed and now you can't afford to farm anymore, that needs to be considered a venue and have to go through the sprinklers and all that. I just think that because it wasn't sprinkled before when it was good enough for the farm worker housing, I think it would just be a conditional use permit so that you can have a public process and the public can be involved, where if you're just renting out your house or your ADU, that's an administrative process. So that's kind of where I see the difference in that. But the venue is something far different. It's more commercial. That's, might be, like a tin roof barn thing where you've got, hundreds of people showing up.
Right. And I look at it, I can go with almost everything you said there, because if somebody on their farm wants to put up 4 hunting cabins and rent them out during hunting season, does it need to be a venue with sprinklers and all that? Absolutely not. As long as there's a way, and like I said, I don't mind both the properties on an ADU property being in, but if the board thinks, okay, one, and if you want the second, you go through a CUP process, I can live with that. As long as there is a process to get a second or a third based on that circumstance, have hearings on that circumstance, I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'd have to say, as far as where I'm at this point, as far as to the question of the ADU, I'm supportive of allowing short-term rentals in one or the other. I think it would be hard for me to get to the, like, all of it, because it does go back. The ADU, that was a kind of an understanding, was that the owners are going to be on site, and understanding that, you know, if you do a short-term rental now, you can be an absentee, because you can. I mean, if you own a house, you don't have to live there. You can rent it out. You can do that. So that's not, but it's not really about the short-term rental for me. It's about the ADU ordinance itself, is that was kind of the compromise that we came up with to sort of have this idea that it wasn't going to all just be absentee landlords that were just renting out everything, whether it was short-term or long-term, didn't really matter, is that somebody would be on site. And so, but I don't see, for me, I don't really necessarily see the difference between long-term rental, short-term rental, as far as the impacts that are the same to me, roughly. And so, but I could go that far. Commissioner Christopher.
No, I'm fine with that as long as we can do the short-term rental in either the main house or the ADU.
Yeah.
I can live with that. I do like Jake's other, as long as we allow a CUP process for those niche, tree houses or whatever, that they don't have to go through a venue process and they can go through their own little CUP process. I'm fine with that.
I'm curious.
And for me, I may be able to waive sprinklers, but we're still gonna have to see, what planning and public works and health is gonna be comfortable with on some of those.
Right. That was my question. I'm curious now, I don't know that those aren't allowed now through a CUP process, as far as that, that's
Are
not
they allowed in the yurts?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
if they're not mandated for yurts, I certainly hope they're not mandated for anything else.
Yeah. So that.
Well, I guess where we're at is that we haven't had a process, and like the yurts is a fine example. It's impossible to get it to the point where you can get it legal, so people just go out and do it anyways. Is how people have felt, or ADUs and renting one out, or so my goal is always to keep these ordinances vague enough so that Lynn has the discretion to get done and create what needs to be done. The things that scare me is if we're going to have Public Works come in and say that they need Title 10 roads to every one of these things. Well, then we might as well just walk away. It's never going to happen. Title 12. Yeah, Title 12.
They'll just all continue to be illegal.
They'll just all continue to be illegal. And then we have no control over the situation at all. So I don't know if that's something that we want to discuss right now, is that right now you can build a house. If you have a road to it, it's been permitted. If you build an ADU, it's still permitted. I don't know why we would need to send the, process-wise, if we get an application for a short-term rental ordinance, why it would even need to be routed to Public Works, because that's already legally in place. You know what I'm saying?
I would agree, unless it comes into one of the CUP things, then that's a different story. But for the regular basic thing, yeah.
Well, I think the difference is going to if the use that you are going to use it for is basically qualifying under residential, then it doesn't need to be, because it's, again, if your road standard, your all that stuff is, we have the minimum standard would be for, residential, your driveway basically, and it's not, but I think there is a difference if you're getting into something that is really more of a commercial nature, if you're having, because I mean, the basis of all of that regulation is public safety and the idea. And I'm always, there's always a balance between, and I've had these debates with the fire chiefs before about having to build roads that they can get, fire trucks down at any time of the year for a single family house. And it's like, yeah, that's a worthy goal, but sometimes it's impractical, and you're making me build this giant thing that likely especially in the dry parts of the county, the time of year where you're going to have a range fire issue, you can drive anywhere off the road. I mean, you're not going to get stuck. You're not going to get, the ground's hard as a rock in anywhere. And so if I can't evacuate because the fire truck's coming in, I will just drive around, go off the road around, when fleeing the fire. So that's less of an issue, because we've had that where we've had to build these roads with 26-foot culverts so that there's the fire truck, and again, that's fine for a big commercial use, but not for residential. But the balance is going to be, when do these tip up? You're talking about 4 units, 6 units. That sounds like a commercial use to me. I mean,
Right, that's what I said. That would.
I'm not necessarily talking about sprinklers and all that kind of stuff, but you do get into, there are public safety issues that have to be, at least, because what will happen is something will happen and somebody gets hurt or dies, and they're going to come looking for somebody with a deep pocket to blame because, we had a range fire and the yurts all caught fire and nobody could get out and somebody died. So, Commissioner Christopher.
I think we're in agreement. I mean, if it's one house on a residential property or acreage, and it's one house, that's just residential and residential standards. If you're going with more than one, that's a CUP process that would go through Public Works for approval on that road. So I would agree with you, if they have multiple in there needs to be a Public Works involvement.
So this is Nochi. I just want to make a couple comments on this, if I may.
Of course.
Okay, so currently under our ADU ordinance, we allow for 1 main home and 1 ADU only. You cannot have more than 1 ADU. And the current provision is they have to use the same driveway to access both the home and the ADU. So in that instance, that is just a driveway. We do not require to get permission from Public Works in terms of the road approach, if the approach is on a county road. But when we have more than 1 ADU, then you have to go through the CUP process, because then, we will consider that as a commercial. And that access driveway is no longer a driveway. It is a road. And, you're required to meet the Title 12, fire access road requirements. So that's something to think about. When we were talking about short-term rental earlier, we are thinking perhaps we can have a separate title for the commissioner to process an STR request. But if they have more than one, and if you kick it back to a CUP process, then to me, we have to kind of go through the planning commission process, circle back to the earlier question, because we are talking about land use regulations, and the zoning ordinance is the right place to talk about that. So we might want to focus on just one short-term rental on, residential properties, similar to an ADU, but, not really, because they can rent it out for short-term rental. But when you have more than one, currently within our code, we can process it through a CUP. We don't have to specify that in the short-term rental ordinance. We might want to just put a limit on that, because otherwise the short-term rental will have to go through planning department. We can have the process go through the commissioners, but it make it really difficult and complicated for the public to know when do you have to go through, whether there's an administrative approval or a CUP. Does that make sense, or am I making it more complicated than necessary?
No, I think at least I think I understand. So, okay. I'm looking.
Yeah, I suggest we just worry about the 1 unit per property. And,
Right.
and everything else can go over there later.
Yeah, I think we're trying to bite off too much all in one. As far as, and I'm open to having the discussion about the other stuff, but I think Mochi's correct. That really is a zoning ordinance change, and that would have to go through the planning commission to do that. But that's the right thing, and good, let's do that if we want to do that. But
I was going to say, yeah, I do want to bring that up months down the road when this one's done. Maybe look into that, but until then, let's just worry about this one.
okay. Okay, that's all my questions I had on here as far as that I had made when I reviewed stuff. So I guess any thoughts as far as I did see, Lynn had put together kind of a draft for Klickitat County that was obviously based on White Salmon, Skamania County-ish models. Seems like I didn't stick them side by side to see where you stole language from. Or you drafted, that was all just,
No, we used the RCW, basically utilize the RCW language.
Yeah,
as far as what's going to be required, and that's at the state level, and then kind of utilized a little bit of Skamania County and White Salmon, to add into the RCW, but the majority of it is RCW language. Keep it simple. Right. I mean, the language is there, just utilize that language and then add to it whatever we want to or need to.
Yeah, I'm always thinking that's a special talent at the state, where the code writer, they take the past legislation and then they codify it and it always seems to end up, it's crisper and simpler, in the code. It's like what the legislature does it has more superfluous language in it sometimes, and then they kind of distill it down into the code. And so, stick with the code language that's in the.
Looking at her draft, yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I don't see anything in there that isn't RCW. And I think there are things in either the White Salmon or the Skamania that we're going to want in ours. And there's things that, one thing I noticed that wasn't in any of them is it had language that notify your tenants of a burn ban. I want signage of a burn ban. These are Portland folks going to come up here and light a campfire. I want a signage that says burn ban in effect in our code. But yeah, I think we need to take one of the other's code or one of the other's ordinance and, pick one and then make our own little tweaks and then come back together and kind of like we did with the appointment policy and just hammer it down.
Okay.
Dan, what else is in those other ones that you'd like to see in ours? Because those codes or those ones came out, I think, before the RCWs changed. And so Lynn takes in the RCWs in here, then has the procedural policy. I wrote down the burn ban signage. What else do you have that you'd like to see in there?
To be blatantly honest, it's all on my computer, and trying to stare at a thing side by side is impossible. I printed them off, but I left my printed copies at home. Other than the draft, I have all the RV stuff for later, but I guess I have a question on pertaining to short-term rentals being yurts, or RVs, or cabins, or tree houses? Does it have to be a actual residential dwelling for us?
I would
Well-
say that it needs to be a permitted structure. The yurts should be permitted because then we know the structural integrity is there. We've done one tree house off of Blackberry Lane in the White Salmon area. It's a permitted tree house. That gives me a lot more comfort than someone who's just put a tree house up. I mean, we're still wanting to make sure we're addressing public safety. So I would prefer to say, you know, a properly permitted structure. And it's not specifically only this type or this type, but it should be something that we as the county can say that we know is a safe structure.
Yeah, I like that. But now the other thing is, there's a group out there that's not Airbnb. It's called Hip Camp. And you can literally rent a tent in some cowboy's field and sleep next to his goats. Is that not going to be allowed for a short-term rental?
As far as building code goes, we do have provisions in the code for temporary structures for things like tents that are limited to 180 days or less in a year of use. But there is verbiage for allowing temporary structures, but then there's still other provisions that they want to make sure it's, say, like, you know, fire retardant fabric, that sort of thing.
Interesting. I just know, I think there could be a call for somebody that lives on a seasonal spring and wants to rent out one campsite down there. That's my thinking, just throwing it out.
I think what we're going to see in the next few years with where things are going on the west side is you're going to see a lot more farm stays to come in where they want to put up tents or something. And it'll have to go through the CUP process likely because they're not going to want one tent. They're going to want 3 or 4 tents in order for their 20 acres to make their farm stay make financial sense. Because you can't make money on a 20-acre parcel anymore, farming it.
Okay. Yeah, as long as, so I'm fine with, not saying tents and going with her permitted structure. I just want to make sure we add other avenues other than residential if it's actually a safe place to stay, because I think those are going to be out there or coming soon. And I like the treehouse. Somebody comes up with a treehouse rental, I might rent it.
Well, maybe go look
I
at
think
Blackberry Lane if we prove it.
There's one somewhere, yeah, like you said. Didn't there used to be one up in Snowden, or was that I think that was maybe that it was non-compliant. I don't know, but I never saw it. I had heard.
I think there's a lot of non-compliant out
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
There is a gentleman in Trout Lake working on getting a property permitted, but there's several units. I believe he'll be going through the conditional use process, but he bought it as is. But there are a few tree houses on that property, and he's working on getting it all compliant. So
yeah, permitted structure sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's as far as I can go today, as far as I do, because as someone who likes to read through the rules and find where there's cracks and loopholes, I think we have to be careful as far as because we'll have people and all kinds of stuff. And again, it's my only concern is the public safety part. That's the foundation of any of the regulation, is just make sure. And unfortunately, there's folks. I love the idea of making the signage on the burn ban. I think that is really, because that's one of the issues that neighbors are always really concerned about. I mean, look at the comments. I think legitimate comments that I read on the under canvas was the concern about having, 90 plus sites, that people have, could have campfires and they could, it's just fire hazard. And that's a really legitimate concern in Klickitat County, or at least for, I would say all of it, but really 2/3 of it, for at least half the year. In fact, burn ban is even a stretch for me sometimes, because we'll still be legal here, and it's a month, that I wouldn't have a burn pile. It's like, you're crazy. And I've had that in my old place, the neighbor, where they were out, it was legal for them to be doing it. They're burning the night before the burn ban went in, and it's just like, good Lord, you shouldn't have done it a month ago, and you're out, but it's legal. You can do it. Of course, it's legal, but if it gets out of the way and burns my house down, it doesn't matter if there was a burn ban or wasn't a burn ban or not. So, Commissioner Christopher.
So yeah, my two big additions, and I can live with everything else, is the burn ban posted signage and figuring out some way that our nuisance compliant person is not the person wielding all the complaints and issuing the fines. I would like a panel or a board to oversee complaints for that.
Okay. Lynn, could you come back with an idea on that, as far as like an appeal, what an appeal process, who's gonna process those complaints, and then ultimately, especially when you get to the 3 strikes, who's going to be the one? Is it, would it be a appeal board? Would it be the Board of Commissioners? Would it be who would it be? Would it be our committee that we haven't used in a decade?
Well, and I'm just thinking also, as we have eventually a public hearing on this, you're going to have Airbnb people testifying, and you're going to have the lady next door testifying. Right. It's going to be pretty easy to find 2 of each on there, with maybe a neutral party for a 5th. You're going to be able to find those people to sit on that board pretty easy during this public hearings.
Okay. And I guess a legal question I'd be curious, we could talk to the prosecuting attorney, is that ultimately, like, if you're revoking somebody's permit and shutting basically their business down, we have to make sure that we're on good kind of that we can have, if we're having basically a committee, a group that's going to be issuing that decision, that we have to have a way, a legal way that there is authority there for them to do that. Because if it's delegated from the board, because it's like
right, but I think it's going to be them making a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners,
right,
for revocation. Okay.
Right.
And we're going to have the final say, is the way I envision this.
Right. That's what I just want to be sure we're on, because ultimately, because I know, we empower our directors, Lynn can do all kinds of stuff, but ultimately they generally have an appeal right to the Board of Commissioners that make the final, if we're actually kind of taking somebody's rights away from them. So
yeah, I'm just trying to take this off Lynn's plate and put it on their own plate over there.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
My plate's running out of room.
Yeah.
I'm emptying your plate.
Okay. Lynn, do you have enough for us to move forward?
I think so. Do you want me to tailor something, kind of use the RCW and tweak it, or do you want me to do more of follow Skamania or white salmon and make sure the RCW language is in there? Is there a feel for that?
I would rather personally have it as a Skamania or a white salmon, up to the other 2, which one they choose, with RCW language in it versus just RCW language.
Yeah.
Personally, I think Lynn's done a great job on all this, and I think we're getting close, and we don't need a lot of the the extra language. It's pretty simple and short. I think if we've already got a draft sitting there and we had the burn ban, We try to define, I mean, one of them that's going to come up that a lot of people like to use is the tiny homes. Is that something, how does that fit into it? You know, we need to be explicitly clear on what can be constituted as an Airbnb or a short-term rental.
I think that would be the permitted structure.
Yeah,
Mhm.
If a tiny home is a permitted structure, then it qualifies.
Well, RVs, tiny homes, and permitted structures are all different things for the most part.
right.
Right, so are we gonna allow RVs as short-term rentals, or are we only saying properly permitted structures? And if they want to have several RVs, then we're just back to the conditional use portion.
Right.
Because you're not gonna want just one RV, I'm assuming.
Right, but we're making this for one structure right now, one building, one something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not talk about more than that. It's a
Right.
matter of, I guess,
So-
are you classifying a tiny house as an RV or as an actual structure, permitted structure?
If they're built on site, they're a permitted structure. If they are built off-site, then Labor and Industries considers them a factory assembled structure, and unless it has a HUD label, I can't issue a placement permit.
Okay, so
So that's
essentially,
kind of that.
in order to get a tiny home, it's either already a permitted structure, which we've already deemed is what we're gonna look for, or we need to allow tiny homes on wheels and RVs.
Which would be something that would have to be a discussion, because I can't permit those, but
Personally, my own feeling, if it's one structure, I'm fine with it being a tiny home on wheels or an RV, one structure.
That's a harder structure. I'm not saying I couldn't get there, but I think you're opening a can of worms. And that's going to be part of the discussion in the afternoon too on the art. I mean, it's all tied together really in a sense. Are we going to
Yeah.
are we
There's-
going to,
There's three of us. I just told you which way I would go. You two can go the other way. I'm not,
I don't know. I think that's a bigger discussion. Like I'm fine with I'm really comfortable with short-term rentals remember, we're talking about short-term rentals now, and we're already, we're making a huge policy shift, sounds like, where we are, we're embracing the idea of short-term rentals. That's a big deal. And then we're talking about short-term, not only can you have short-term rentals, you can have short-term rentals in ADUs, another big shift that we're doing. Well, now you're talking about, you can not only have short-term rentals, but we're okay. You can have them in a tent, an RV, tiny home, a tree house, whatever, which that's, I'm an old dog and you're asking me to go
Okay,
quick.
so now we know, Dave. Jake, are we sticking with in a permanent structure or are we allowing them on wheels?
I guess the issue that I come across is that we already have people that are using tiny homes because there's this huge tiny home craze right now, and they're using them for Airbnbs. If we don't allow it, all we're doing is shoving them into the darkness, saying they're not illegal, and we're waiting for somebody to turn it in. If there's already the desire from the public to use it, and it's currently already being used, if you're going to shut those people out, all you're going to do is open up a can of worms on that side where people are going to keep doing it illegally. So my issue is how do we make sure, if it's got a HUD sticker on it and it's been built and you have that one on your property, whether it's an ADU could be 900 square feet, the tiny home could be 400 square feet. Either way, you're going to have one family staying in that thing. I don't care which way it's under.
But typically a tiny home won't get a HUD sticker.
Right, that's the difference. A tiny home, I got a flatbed trailer out here. I could go build a chicken house on it, call it a tiny home.
That was my clarification that I was just going to make to Jake. It can't be HUD sticker because RVs and tiny homes don't have a HUD sticker.
Right.
So,
like
L&I won't assign them a
I
sticker.
meant the L&I sticker from L&I. That's what I meant. If they have an L&I sticker from those guys, I mean, you look at these tiny homes that are getting built, they're $80,000 and they're pretty darn nice. And people from the city that are coming out and staying in them, they're used to 400 square feet. And actually the tiny home's pretty big compared to their apartment in a lot of instances.
So for clarification, your permitted structure or tiny home, if it has an L&I sticker, not if it doesn't have, and no trailers. Is that correct?
This is Lisa Evans again. I'm back on the call. If I can interject real quick, just to jump back to your idea of keeping it simple. I know in the RCW it defines dwelling unit, and then in White Salmon's ordinance, they also further define a little bit more about exactly what they considered a dwelling unit. So, you know, because you're right, there's so many things out there. There's tiny homes, there's yurts, there's tents. And so in the RCW and then with White Salmon, they kind of did a definition of dwelling unit that allowed for them to cover a lot of different options, you know, by having that definition. And that way you don't have to try to define everything, especially because some of these platforms like Airbnb, you know, they promote an experience, and I don't know how you regulate an experience.
I would agree with you, but we seem to be trying.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so just to back up, like I said, to, you know, to your plan of just keeping it simple, you know, I just wanted to mention that dwelling unit is defined in the RCW.
And we have dwelling unit as defined in our draft as means a residential dwelling of any type, including single-family residence, apartment, condominium, cooperative unit, or room, in which a person may obtain living accommodations for less than 30 days. And so maybe we don't need to define it.
I don't
other
see
than that.
and
I just want to move to the meeting.
Ross, can you
Ross-
please mute your phone?
yeah, please mute your phone. We're getting
Or if Lee can do it.
Jake, would you say this dwelling unit definition would incorporate those tiny homes you're talking about with the L&I sticker?
Oh, well, I just said dwelling unit, it says means a residential dwelling of any type. To me, that's pretty broad.
Got it. I like it. I'm good with it, just the way it is.
I'm a no on that. I'm sorry. I don't think that's what that means. To me, a dwelling unit, and it does have including blah, blah, blah. I don't see the word tent, chicken coop. I mean, what's a dwelling? I mean, otherwise, I mean, it's basically anything, any space you habitate, outhouse, whatever is now, I can experience that. I guess, I think that's too broad, but that's, you know, I'm only
You have
one.
to be careful because later today, we're going to be discussing RVs with a yearly permit and making them a dwelling unit, so.
Right. I will be curious as far as how other, I mean, that's this afternoon's discussion. You know, and I understand the desire to not create, you know, where we make people not be legal, but I also, the solution isn't that we're just have no rules about anything unless we're literally going to just go back to the Wild West, which if we want to do that, that's fine. But where we don't, why do we even have permits for anything? Why not just let people do whatever they want? And so I don't know. I think that's a big stretch for me to go to that. We're going to allow short-term rentals in tents. As that, not through that we're going to consider a tent as a dwelling unit.
Would you like me to propose it as a properly permitted structure or a properly labeled factory assembled structure per labor and industries, something along that line?
I mean, that would get me further there. I'd have to think about that as far as what that covers exactly. I just
So
think
I guess
simple.
one of the others we have in the county
Go ahead.
is people are putting up teepees and renting a teepee out in the back of their property and making it a glamping teepee. And they charge a pretty penny for it, because where we're seeing and what we've seen through COVID is that the way people travel is changing. People didn't want to go to the hotels. People wanted to go to individualized experiences. And I think that I read an article recently that is expected to explode in the near future, because the way people's desire to travel is changing. And I would rather be ahead of it than be stuck getting behind it.
Okay.
Well, and I would be ahead of it, because every time they come and stay in that teepee, they spend money, and that's economic development dollars. So I'm going to say I vote for the wordage that's already here. You guys can fight it out amongst yourselves.
I'm fine with the wordage that's there. I think there is, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. You and I have a difference of opinion about what that language means. And that's, to me, dwelling unit doesn't mean those things. It means something else. It means something kind of in between. One thing I would say, I'm all about economic development, but these are all the things that economic development we're talking about. These are tourist-based economic development, which I'm fine. But I also want to balance, if we gear our whole economy in part of the county to support tourism almost exclusively to other things, you do run the risk of that actually damaging other economic development. As far as if I have, we have all kinds of vacation rentals and stuff that are in throughout all of our neighborhoods, it may be less likely, it may be less desirable for other activities to get located there, because it's simply tourism. I'm fine with tourism, but I don't like basing our economy. I'm not in favor of basing as that being kind of the single central pillar of what we're going to build our economy on in either the West, anywhere. It's not. Those are actually not. They're fine for jobs, but those tend to be lower income, seasonal, and I'm all for the. We're not actually talking about that. We're talking about operators. So these are actually owners, folks that own their stuff. I just want to be careful. That's all, and not talk about making huge sweeping changes, which these are, based on a Zoom call today in the interest of expediency. Commissioner Christopher.
Questions for, I guess, Commissioner Anderson and Lynn. Is this definition of a dwelling unit? This is essentially the state's RCW. What does White Salmon and Skamania use as theirs? Do they narrow down and pick each individual unit, or do they kind of have it the same way?
Dan, I can answer that question for you. Yeah, White Salmon has an additional portion of their ordinance where they further define what a dwelling unit is. And it allows, it's still pretty general, but allows a little bit more specific definition. In Skamania County, they really dial into exact examples of what they're looking at. And when you get that specific, like they are in Skamania County, you inevitably forget an option here or there, and then that leads to some challenges. So yeah, it's definitely worth, your time to look into both of them at their sections and, kind of pick and choose. Although I do want to second Dave Sauter's idea that we're just the Wild West and that we just get rid of all regulations. I think that's a great idea, Dave. Run with it.
I can read you from White Salmon.
I have Skamania's up as well.
Oh,
So
okay. Okay, White Salmon dwelling unit. Their definition is one or more rooms occupied, designed, or intended for occupancy as separate living quarters and containing 4 or more of the following: 1, refrigeration; 2 cooking facility, including cooking stove, hot plate, range hood, microwave, or similar appliance, or wiring or venting to support same. 3 dishwashing machine. 4 sink intended for meal preparation, not including a wet bar. 5 garbage disposal. 6 toilet. 7 shower or bathtub. That's out of the white salmon's verbiage.
So Skamania, let me get back to that page, says only the following types of short-term rentals are allowed: whole house rentals, partial house rentals such as individual rooms, accessory dwelling units, residential accessory buildings such as guest houses or sheds, park model recreational vehicles, including tiny homes licensed as park model recreational vehicles by the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. Campsites and other RVs are not allowed as short-term rental, vacation rentals. I would definitely prefer this verbiage over the one Lynn just gave.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fine with Skamania counties. That's I can live with that one.
But does that include the tiny homes? And like Jake said, we're going to outlaw the yurts that are already out there. We're going to outlaw the teepees that are already out there.
I believe that language would incorporate tiny homes because it referenced the labeling as a park model by Labor and Industries. That's typically how those are labeled.
Okay.
They're
So-
not HUD labeled so that I can issue a placement permit, but they are labeled by LNI as like a park model.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, Dave wants Skamania County standards that I read. I'm gonna stick with, I want the verbiage that's written in the draft. It's a tie, Jake, pick a side.
I think the other thing we need to talk about is that we're gonna get on here a bunch of what Lynn has called the temporary structures that are up for 180 days a year or 220 days a year. That think of what Under Canvas is doing and what they're charging a night. And if you want to do that on the backside of your property and charge $300 a night for your glamping tent, but you can't do that, but yet you could put a tiny house on it. I think the temporary structures are fine because most people tear it all down in the wintertime anyways, because that's the same thing that Under Canvas is planned because we don't have the tourism during that time. So if we take Skamania counties and add temporary structures, it's fine with me.
I would agree if we add temporary structures, because my whole point of keeping the draft or adding temporary structures is if we of a county are gonna say that yurts are fine if you're a big giant developer, but they're not fine if you only have one, that's not right, and I'm not gonna go with that, so.
But a yurt in building code should be permitted if it's going to stay up year round. It has to be a properly permitted structure if you intend to leave it year round. So then a yurt, it's just gonna be a properly permitted structure at that point.
Yeah, but if you're not leaving it year round and you're just putting it up for the summer, it wouldn't be needing to be permitted because it would be a temporary structure. And that's where, like Jake was saying, I'm fine with Skamania as long as we have temporary structure, because the people that want to throw something up in the summer should be allowed.
Jake, how do you feel?
I don't know.
Hates
I
it.
would have that. I mean, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of temporary structures just for that. You're talking about yurts and these, yeah, that's fine. But what's the definition of temporary structures? 2 pieces of plywood propped up against each other. And I guess, part of me is hey, let the buyer beware. If you want to go camp out in a plywood chicken house for the summer, go ahead on her, I guess. But I don't know. And I would remind my seatmates that all of this is fine. All we're doing is we're putting a draft out there. I can guarantee you in the public hearing process, you're going to hear from lots of people and that are going to be all over the place on this. There's 3 of us and we have 3 different ideas. when you're, when it goes out to the general public, you're just be prepared is what I'm saying. And then, and if we're actually doing our job correctly, we should modify what we do based on the comments that we get, if, one way or the other. And I understand all we're talking about doing is just putting it out there. It's like, here's kind of what we're thinking about. What do you think about this? Believe me, they're going to think about it, and we're going to hear from folks.
With that, this is only a draft.
Yeah.
I would agree with Jake for this draft and use the schemania wordage, add temporary structure.
Yep. Let's
have the public hearings. Let's see what they say.
Yeah, I'm fine with that actually, because again, it's a draft. It's not, we can put it out there, and I think I'm good with putting the temporary structures in the draft, because again, it's going to drive that conversation, and we're going to hear from folks about what they.
I might change my mind based off of what I hear from folks, but right now I think it needs to be there.
Yeah.
And I can add the code language that references temporary membrane type structures, because that gives us that coverage of the code where it does allow for temporary membrane structures, i.e. tents, yurts, teepees, not 2 pieces of plywood.
Okay.
propped up. I mean, I think that would give us a little better coverage there.
I mean, I know I'm saying extremes, but again, people, if you two different,
they will come.
If you do, I mean, they will, as far as where, and unless we are, we just want to be, you can just do whatever you want. And part of me is okay with that. I am, but I also, there's a reason it's not necessarily the Wild West anymore. And because unfortunately there weren't a lot of lawyers in the old Wild West, or people carried their lawyers on their hip, but we don't. We don't.
I'm still do.
Yeah, that's fine. So, okay, Lynn, do you think you got enough to?
I believe I do.
Okay.
Do you actually have direction in?
I think I do, yes.
Good.
Lynn, you've done a great job with this. Not only did you do a great job when I started talking to you, but she also preempted us knowing that it was coming and prepared a year ago for it. So thank you for being forward.
I've been thinking about this a lot for a long time, so.
Perfect. Well, we're moving ahead. That's good.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and adjourn for the lunch hour, and we are back at 1:15, I think.
I believe it's 1, I think.
It's 1 o'clock, Lee. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Okay.
Hang on, let me look real quick.
No, it doesn't matter. We can be back at 1. Other than I know people might want to.
I think it was at 1.
Quite often on workshops, we scheduled at 1:15. We had a longer lunch for some reason.
It is
think it's
1:15. It is
yeah,
1:15 on the schedule.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, we'll be back at
I'll see you
1:15.
guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Got good news. I just heard from Kavanaugh that it looks like we're going to be going to phase 2 on Monday.
Okay.
Yay.
Good, I know.
And
Good.
now the bad news. The variant strain just hit Vancouver as well, a mutated strain.
Great. Well, just, everybody's just got to be careful. Extra diligent. All right, it is now past 1:15, so I will call us back into order on our workshop. Our next order of business is a building code compliance director, Lynn Ward. We're going to continue our discussion regarding options to address the use of recreational vehicles as year-round places of residence. And Lynn, do you want to tee us up? We've got several folks on the phone. So if you want to give us a brief staff review of the topic.
Yes. I was again asked to do some research by Commissioner Anderson, because a good portion of complaints is occupying RVs. So I started doing research, and the verbiage is not easily accessible, or at least that I could find, where it indicates where that 30, 60-day rule came from. I was hoping to find a specific source, you know, it says it here, but I've not been able to find that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I cannot find it. So other areas, what they have done is similar to what we have done, that we cannot issue a placement permit for an RV. That is something we are not able to do because it does not have a HUD insignia. But what they have done to try to facilitate some kind of assistance to people who are low income, struggling with life circumstances, that sort of thing, is to issue temporary RV permits that are not in conjunction with a building permit, so that they can have one individual RV on their own property for longer than the 30 consecutive days or 60 days in a 12-month period, to try to help the problem of people not always being able to afford other housing, but providing a valid option to not having any kind of accommodations whatsoever. So that information I provided as well. Some of the other areas, what they have done, a lot of them have done 180 days at a time, something along that line. But the areas kind of close to us is what I focused on, or smaller counties. And so that's in the supporting documentation. I included mainly HUD language, RCW language, and some House bill language, but those predominantly apply to manufactured home parks, permanent type accommodations. There's very little that I could find that was specific to temporarily using RVs. So that being said, there's not a whole lot that we can cite for code to make decisions from when it comes to the temporary aspect.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. I guess I'd open it up for questions or comments, and we'll go from there from my seatmates. Nobody seems to want to go first.
I guess since I asked Lynn to do it, my issue is we've got a lot of people living in RVs throughout this county, and that is their only option. And if they had a better option, they would probably take it. The problem that we have is that they're kind of living under the radar. They don't feel they have the safety, security, the equity in the situation that other people do have. And the question is how do we bring these people up to as close to code as possible, and then give ourselves a little bit of leverage if we need it over the situation when we do need it. I think a lot of these people are just trying to do the best they can with the hand they've been dealt in life. And I wanted to get your guys' opinion on if this is a direction we should or want to go. It's probably going to be contentious, but it seems like every discussion we have is going to be contentious this year. I'm not afraid to have the conversation. I think Lynn did a great job tracking down the information. I think it's also important to note that there are RVs out there now that are better insulated and more expensive than my house, and a lot of houses that we have in central Klickitat County. So yeah, I don't know where we'd like to go on that, but I think Lynn did a great job looking at what her requirements would be. And then also we got that email from David yesterday who looked into it, who I think shed some light on it. What are your guys' directions? What are your thoughts, Dan?
Well, I have I have a whole bunch of directions. One simple question for Lynn that I necessarily could not find in Washington revised statutes. Is it legal for people to live in their trailers? Take the septic and the water out of the equation. I can't find anything illegal about it in state
That-
law.
That's the hard part, is there's no firm verbiage. There's verbiage that says it's meant as temporary accommodations. It's meant for camping, traveling, things of that nature. That an RV is recreational by definition, and that's the intent. But there's no verbiage I can find that says if someone does live in it, that it's necessarily considered illegal. I can't issue a placement permit for it, but the language isn't very specific that I was able to locate saying, no, you can't do it, period.
So I guess that's my point, is what we're looking to do is make more laws that would then restrict even more so whatever is on the state law. And as long as we know that's the direction we're going, just to point out, aware of that. I did talk to another citizen at lunch today when I told them that, and we were talking about this, and I mentioned the not allowed to have more than one RV per property, and they thought that was absolutely ridiculous. This is someone that works in this building, not somebody sleeping in their RV. Look at me. We already discussed earlier, I have an ADU on my property. I also have my fifth wheel on my property. What if my grandparents wanted their trailer on their property, just parked there? It's now illegal because you can only have one. There's a lot of people that live in town that store their RV on somebody else's property out in the country. Are we going to make them illegal? So by wrangling in this small little group you're trying to wrangle, you're going to outlaw other people and or strip them of their rights and freedoms. So with that, I'll quit talking for a while.
There's nothing that says you can't store your RV on your property. You can. What it specifically speaks to is the occupancy of an RV on property is limited to 30 consecutive days or 60 days in a year. Occupying that RV, that's not to talk about the storage of an RV or, I live in town and I'm keeping my RV at my parents' house. That's not what that's speaking to. It's the living in an RV, occupying.
Right. I was just going off of this that didn't have anything to do with living on or living in.
Right. We're talking about occupying it, giving them an ability to occupy an RV. Say, I spend every last dime I have buying a piece of property to get out of the big city, but I literally I'm a senior citizen and I make $900 a month. I can't build a house, so I can't afford an RV. And so that's what I'm trying to do to give myself a place to live. I think that's the intent of more of what we're trying to assist with, because I've had a few code compliance issues that literally those people that they're like, if I can't do this, I have no place to live. And I think that's what we're trying to help.
Right. But that's, I guess I would say, if what they're doing is only illegal under our county code, placing more restrictions on it may not necessarily be the answer if we already have issues. If they're dumping waste or whatever, that's already an issue that doesn't need another law written for it. So I guess I would say I'm going to more than likely stay out of most of this discussion because I may not be voting on what you guys end up agreeing on anyway. So I'll stay out and see where you guys go and speak up occasionally. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. First off, let's make sure we're clear as far as what we're actually talking about. My expectation was we're talking about occupancy in RVs, that people are living in them. That has been a perennial problem in Klickitat County. Not about storing RVs. If I want to store 10 RVs on my property, that's perfectly legal to do that now or anytime. That's not against any law anywhere. As to us doing something that the state is not, it's not in state law. That's not what we've talked about doing or have been doing. Our policy as to that we have code on was under the assumption that we were just enacting state law. We have been now, it seems, as I've said before, Lynn's predecessor, that was the position that had always been in the county, was that, oh no, it's against state law. Because we had tried to find ways to, how can we waive that? How can we modify that? But if the interpretation was state law was 30 days, 60 days, that's state law. It's like, I don't have the power to not enforce the state law. Now, as it turns out, because I agree, I can't really find anything that is an absolute prohibition on people that's the 30, 60 day, other than, what the language does. These are meant for temporary habitation, not permanent residence. But I don't see any absolute prohibition that people can't live in them. So I don't think we're talking about adding more layers. I think we're actually talking about cleaning up our, misunderstanding as far as what the state law was. Now, it could be the legislature may come out at some point, because I think we're going to see more of this. I think we're going to see more people living, and they may clean it up. They may clean up their language so it makes it specific. And I couldn't speculate what that will mean exactly, but I think at this point, we have some discretion about what we want to do as far as, and I guess that's my first question to my seatmates is, yeah, what's the policy piece of this? If it's true that we can allow folks longer than 30 or 60 days, is that our policy direction? Is that what we want to do? And I would say yes. For me, I support that, because I think we already have many, many, many people that are living in RVs that is their primary, that's what they're living in, and have for years. And this goes back, I've known people for 20 years, 25 years that, they're still living in an RV, and they're perfectly fine with that. I think we can deal with the kind of health and safety issues as far as the water, wastewater, what are we going to do with that? And I think that will clean up some of our code compliance issues, because we've had many of these cases have been for this exact thing, is that the neighbor doesn't like them living in their RV, and so they file a case. And our policy has been, yeah, you're right, you can't live in one because the state law won't let you. And so then we're stuck trying to make them compliant. And then, as you said, there's people that they would be homeless if they couldn't live in an RV. So I'm in favor of making it so people can. I think it would be difficult for me to get multiple ones on pieces of property, because then it's like, well, that's just an RV park is what that is. And I think it should be it's easier for me to support the idea. If you're on your property, of course, if you want to live in an RV, I'm totally fine with that. Again, as long as you don't have raw sewage running down the ditch, and that you're not getting your water from the creek. So I guess, so that's where I'm at on it.
Well, I guess I'll me, I can't stay quiet anywhere. So I'm fine with that. We understand that state law is legal. My opinion is county should be legal. Now, looking at what public health did for wastewater, and I'm fine with a yearly permit as long as that price tag is very small, because any fee is a new tax. And they already don't have money, so I don't want to price them out of not getting a permit. So fine a yearly permit so we know who they are. But holding tank, I either want them to, we either need to set up something where they're on a regular pumping station cycle, or they sign a waiver that they're not dumping it on their property and they're taking it to a facility as easy as possible, not a lot of overburdensome garbage on the end of that. And as far as water goes, I don't think we should regulate their water intake, where they get it from or how they get it. Because most of them are carrying it in via 5-gallon bucket and putting it in the holding tank in their RV, which isn't any different than if they're being delivered water, potable water from Bishop Sanitation that does it a lot of places. That's a whole other issue that I plan on bringing up, is potable water for homes being brought in via truck to allow for more accommodation on home sites, but where they get their water is not of my concern.
Okay.
I think, like Dan said, as long as these people have a plan for how they are going to be using their water and their septic, I just want to make sure they have a plan and they're not dumping it on the ground. That's the biggest thing. It was nice to see what David came up with in terms of that. But the problem that we have, Dan, is that if you can't show the potable water, you can't get a building permit, so you can't hook up. You know, there's so many different parts that come into this that it may not be illegal, but the applicable process of the process stops it from happening. Kind of like, you know, what people have when it comes to yurts or something. Just the process makes it so that you can't get through it for a lot of instances. Yeah, I don't care if we call this a placement proposal or a hardship proposal. I don't care if it's you living on your property or your cousin living on your property. And as long as there's one of them, I don't see it being a big issue. I just want to give us the ability so that we know, number one, where they're at, so we know how many there are. Number two, that we know that they have a plan for their septic, that they're not just dumping it on the ground. And if they're going to bring it in 5-gallon, you know, barrels, or if they're going to have Bishop show up, doesn't matter to me. Most RVs don't hardly use any water at all. I mean, you don't wash your dishes the same way you do when you're hooked up to a well.
Right, and my thing with what public health delivered, when it comes to drinking water, it seems like for the most part, those statutes apply when you're doing a building or placement permit. These are not doing building and placement permits. If they are, then fine. Here's the paperwork. If you're placing your RV while you're building your house, then that you qualify. But for the average person that might be living on their property in an RV, they can't afford to put in a well. They might go through such minimal amount of water that it isn't justifiable to them to have a weekly service with Bishops to come deliver 500 gallons or whatever. So I don't want to price them out of the market when they can go to their neighbors and fill 5-gallon jugs off their well. So I guess I would say I'm okay with Jake's, I think the way I heard it, understanding of we just want to know where you're getting it from. But I don't want to over-regulate where they get their water from. What they're doing with their septic, yeah, I want to know what you're doing with it. But the
I had a little more discussion with David last night, and he said if the building code is not being applied, which we wouldn't be doing because we can't. I mean, this is not what we're doing, is applying building code. He said then health would have a little more flexibility to work with. So that was a further discussion we had after he typed this up.
Well, I will say I'm conflicted because we're trying to give people, it's like we're treating them, we want them to basically have the same rights as a residence. These are their homes, this is what they're living in, but we're not having any requirements. Why do I have to have them for my house then? I mean, why can't I have a holding tank for my wastewater? I mean, why do I have to have, why does the county even involved in me as far as my water supply? You know, and so it's, you know, because of public health is why. That's the basis of all of our land use authority, is public health, as far as that you can't, even to the point, and you can have the argument that it's none of your business. If I want to drink water out of a mud puddle in my RV, that's my business, and I can do that, and I guess that's okay. But I'm having trouble with. I'm all for people having freedom to do what they want, but then it's like it's different for them. It's like we're almost incentivizing, because we already have people that think we should not have to have water source for building permits. There's folks, when we have that, I've been talked to multiple times on that, as far as that we should be able to just, if I want to have my, a 50-gallon barrel in the back of my pickup and go to my friend's house and get water and have it plumbed into my house, I should be able to do that. And that's fine if we're gonna, yes, that's true, other than there's state laws about that. And if you can convince them to change that, then that's fine. But this is contrary to what we said before. This isn't the Wild West. There are rules, that we have to be in compliance with state law. I think on this, I mean, I'm open to it, I guess. I just am cautious about, we're seemingly that we're so interested in, the easiest thing we could do to get rid of all compliance issues is just get rid of all rules. We wouldn't need any compliance at all. We wouldn't need.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. That would be.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Why do we even have building permits? Why do we have anything? Think how easy that would be, and how streamlined and efficient and quick and cheap that would be. We could get rid of half the employees at the county.
And that's what I said. I can understand the septic part of it and wanting to know where they're going.
I'm just curious, in your own thinking, why septic versus water?
Because if they're spreading feces on the ground, that could go in the water and run onto the next people's property and affect them. If I'm drinking some disease out of a creek, I'm only affecting myself. I'm not spreading it to you, unless I drink E. coli or COVID out of the creek, and then I'm going to cough COVID on you. But
okay,
it's self-inflicted, and I don't care. You can self-inflict yourself all you want, but when you start interrupting your neighbor that with a feces issue, then I agree with you. It's a public health concern for the area, not just the person drinking the water out of the creek, which I don't think they're drinking water out of the creek. They're bringing it in 5-gallon buckets, or they have a holding tank, and they're getting bishops to come drop it off 100 gallons or 500 gallons at a time, once every 3 or 4 months. They're not drinking water out of the creek. But I don't want to over-regulate it either. The feces, I can see some regulations on, or some inspections, that, okay, we're fine with an affidavit that you're taking your solid waste out and dumping it at a decent location, but you're also signing on that you have an on-site inspection twice a year. I don't care about things like that. I just don't want to start making them putting in septic tanks, and because now you're doing is forcing them out through writing code. And I'm not in favor of that. So if you can come up with a septic issue that cleans it up without making them buy a septic, I'm listening.
And do we want to have it be an official permit, or do we clean up our language and remove the 30, 60-day language? I don't know what the best avenue is.
Oh, I want the 30, 60-day gone if it's not a state law. That's my view.
I also like the idea of having the hardship permit, because honestly, if you're living in a trailer, it's a hardship. One way or another, likely. Most people don't choose to do it because they've got $2 million in the bank and choose to live in their trailer. And so I think that's a fair assumption. And yes, there might be somebody who does want to live in their trailer because they're minimalist. Totally fine. For me, I like the idea of the permit, because then we know how many there are. We know where they're at. These are people who, we need to know exactly where it is. So when we get an emergency call, and we know where to send the fire and rescue and EMS, The other reason I think is that if they have a permit and they're going to try to keep that permit, if they're going to trash their property and they know that they could lose their permit by trashing their property, and we're getting a whole bunch of complaints because they're trashing it, that little bit of leverage might keep fewer people from trashing their property. So that's why I like that direction. And it does give us a little bit of legitimate leverage over the situation in case if it's getting out of hand.
I have a question for Lynn that you probably can't answer. And it might seem like a really weird question, but are outhouses legal in our county? I mean, you would have to ask health department, but
That's regulated by health, but my understanding is as long as it's an approved compostable toilet, incinerating toilet, there are certain models that the state has approved.
Oh.
And then
but you
health
can't just
can
dig a
approve
hole
that.
6 feet in the ground and
Yeah,
use an outhouse like we used to.
there's certain rules on that, but that would be something that would go through the health department. But we've had a few people permit, say like off-grid homes, and they have solar to run, water heaters and that sort of thing, but they do have composting or incinerating toilets, and those just have to be approved by the health department.
Right. But those things are super expensive. I can't see people in a trailer do that, but I wouldn't doubt it if we have a few trailers out there without houses behind them.
Right.
So that was kind of my question where that was going. Which might seem dirty to some people, but I've used an outhouse.
The other thing that we don't think about very often, but there are places where millions of people live and they survive on trucked in water. You can go to Mexico, and even some of these multi-million-dollar resorts are still surviving on trucked in water. We have places in America that survive on trucked in water because of the saltwater contamination under the water. And so you got a boat to water in. Trucking of water is a regular occurrence worldwide. I don't know why we would not allow that for somebody that legally is trying to do everything else right.
And that was a conversation for building permits later for actual houses and dwellings. I was going to bring that issue up, but
my language simply says approved potable water and sanitation. And so that's why we defer to health. So it's up to health to approve what the method is. But my verbiage says approved potable water and sanitation.
I know there are places in Washington State that have trucked in water, fully legal. I spent yesterday reading all of those. So yes, no, there isn't a ton of them, but there are plenty. So I don't know how, if we choose to go that route, public health is going to look at law and look at what else is happening in the state of Washington. And I don't know how they can say it's not okay when other areas and counties say it is okay, but just for
that would be David's homework.
Right.
Not Lynn's. Although I think, I don't know, I think most of the only one I know of that I'm aware of is in Klickitat County along the Yakima. And that's not for economic reasons. It's because of the groundwater and the oversubscribed basin. So it's not really a supply issue. It's not a health issue or an economic issue. It's that they don't want any more groundwater withdrawn from the water. I'm totally open to having a discussion about trucked water. I do think it is something that we should look at in a broader context of our kind of zoning. One of the foundation, idea of, if we're looking at subdivisions, is we make the assumption that there is adequate groundwater to supply if we're doing a short plat or a subdivision or whatever. And we know from the reason that is uneconomical to drill a well, is that sufficient cause to be able to have an alternative way to do it? And if we're going to allow that, that's fine, but we might want to look at, should we be actually encouraging development in areas that, the groundwater won't support, or are we okay with having folks? Because part of the reason there's people, and I'm not talking about RVs or anything like that, but we have areas of the county that they went out and did these short plats in areas where there is literally, wells are $50,000 to drill a well. And oh yeah, there's a reason that lot only cost $8,000 for 20 acres, because there's no water on it. And so those exist today, but I'm just talking about this is a further conversation. Some other point is that, do we actually want to encourage that? Is that something we want to see more of? Or do we want to have provisions to kind of accommodate, take care of folks those exist today, and try to not have more of a problem in the future in those areas? And I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just saying that should be part of that conversation, I think. Commissioner
I
Christopher.
did not think of this as that scenario. So that's good to hear, but
Yeah. Yeah, because when you're talking about trucked water for an RV, as we've all said, those are pretty minimal uses, that they're water, but it's the if you allow it for that, there's going to be folks that want, to have it for a house where, that's going to be significantly more water usage, and what's the difference, I guess. Commissioner Christopher.
right. And to me though, some guy that's got a house out in the sticks that wants to have a 500 or 1,000 gallon holding tank, that's fine with me. I really have no concerns at all. If a developer wants to, make a short plot of 10 different lots that we know doesn't have water, and he's going to sell them to somebody thinking there's water there, that's kind of a different issue to me. I'm not willing to sacrifice the guy that has the land, that wants to live remote, out in the middle of nowhere. It's rocky ground, the wells are too deep, whatever, but that's the area he likes. It's potable water. It's potable water in all third world countries. It's potable water here in Washington State. There's no reason it shouldn't be potable water in Klickitat County.
Okay, I wouldn't necessarily put us to the third world country standard. I would hope we would.
Parts of our county might
higher,
be considered.
Right, but your point is well taken. Yes.
Have you driven some of the roads in our county?
Yeah. I grew up in this county. I've been on pretty every road in this county. So some of them on purpose, some of them by accident. So.
Right. So okay, back off the potable water in houses. That's a future issue. Yeah. Let's get back to RVs and what do we want? Maybe pick water or septic, and we'll discuss that issue until we get it fixed.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Again, these are going to be drafts, so.
I've talked the most, so you guys handle it.
And yeah, my understanding from David again is if we're pursuing temporary occupancy of RVs for people to have another method to survive and have a place to live, and we don't apply the building code, then he does have more flexibility to work with regarding the water and sewer portions. He's doing COVID clinics, so he's not able to join our conversation to clarify that, but he did say he'd have a little more flexibility to work with.
Right.
That's what I read anyway in this kind of thing there.
Right.
So I guess for me, changing it from a temporary placement proposal to a temporary hardship proposal would go a long ways, because placement has the idea of a placement permit, which has a different persona of the situation. Other than that, I think Lynn did a great job keeping this one real simple. And then a lot of it will come down in terms of administration and how it gets administered between the individuals. But I mean, a lot of these, if I play this out on my side of the county far enough, the only place that I see somebody who's going to be able to afford to live that's a raft guide in the summertime is probably in an RV somewhere or a tent somewhere like they're already doing. This gives us at least some ability to control the situation. So as I said, I was interested in this to begin with, and if we can get rid of that 60, 90, that's great.
And that'll be, also up to planning. I mean, we're gonna have to go through planning because that's language in their title as well. So I don't want to speak for Mochi. She's, I think, gone this afternoon. But that 30 and 60-day language, I believe, is in Title 19 also. So we are gonna have to, see what planning says.
Oh, we have plans for Title 19 too.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And just to clarify, I wasn't opposed to that you had to be the owner of the RV to be on your property. My concern was I only want one, you're not running a RV park. And just
So we could take out the language that specifically says own your RV on your property to say one RV per
Right.
property.
And then we, of
Because
course,
maybe you have a relative that,
right,
you
maybe
know.
you got a relative, whatever, and we should have something in our permit application that if you're not the owner, that there's some declaration from the owner that they're okay with it. So that, somebody doesn't just put an RV.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, sure, it's okay.
water.
Yeah, grandma won't care. It's okay. Aunt Susie hardly ever comes out here. She won't know this. It'll be okay. Okay. Anything else? You feel like you got enough? What's the process?
I think so. And is it something that the building department would administer, or is it going to be more through planning? I mean, I'm not clear on what the best angle there is as far as temporarily approving a hardship.
It seems like if it's not a placement permit, if we're not using the building code and all that stuff, it really is not a building department issue. It really is more, it's really more the planning department. I think, I don't know. I guess I could be convinced one way or the other. I do have some, I see.
Lori's there.
Planning.
Yeah. So this is Lori, and I'm here for Mochi, who couldn't be here this afternoon. So definitely we would need to revise, update some of our standards, because we do have our recreation park ordinance, and that covers both like tent camping and RVs. So definitely we'd need to update things, and I'm not sure exactly all that would need to be updated and revised, but we can work together and figure it all out.
So what is our, if we're going to use, which I like the idea of using, hardship. What's our definition of that though, as far as, and does it really even matter? I mean, or is it if you're choosing to live in an RV as your primary residence, it's just assumed you have a hardship, which I suspect is probably true. But, in the past, when we had, before we had ADUs, we had hardship dwellings. We had some specific verbiage as far as what constituted a hardship, as far as how you qualified as a hardship. And is that something we're even interested in doing, or is that just making it more complicated? Because then, because we are still, don't think this is going to make a bunch of problems just go away. They're not. I mean, there are still going to be folks that, okay, now the RV's okay, but we're still going to get nuisance complaints about people having garbage, junks, barking dogs, too many junk cars around the RV. It just eliminates one box they can check when they're filling those in. And so I think anything that we can do to make it as unambiguous and tight as possible and simple, that gives it one because then it's like, well, they don't have a hardship. They're not either. They're driving around in a $50,000 car. And so
Well, Well, I don't like the actual word hardship because you're labeling someone. I wish we could come up with a better word than that, but you're labeling someone, I don't know, in their financial situation, that I wish there was ways we could use a different word that doesn't label a financial situation.
Okay.
I only like the word hardship because this comes down to marketing, and it's a lot harder to fight against the marketing when you're calling it hardship.
Yeah. There's truth in that.
Yep. Like I said, I'm not opposed to hardship. If I could think of another word to suggest, I would do it, but I can't think of one, so it's not a sticking point with me.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll
So
leave it in something
In
else.
Skamania County, it has a temporary hardship dwelling where an occupant of the RV will receive continuous care or assistance from someone who resides in the will administer care. 1 year permit with renewal. So they call it within the Skamania County hardship as well.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't like hardship, but I can get away with it. I don't want to put in all the coding of, oh, you got to have somebody taking care of you, or show us your bank accounts, or show us your disability from the veterans. I don't want to get into that.
Well, and I would say too, is before our use of hardship, it was a secondary dwelling. It wasn't, so it was a little different in that, because we're talking about this as, you're just, you're just going to live in your RV.
And I hope that, and I'm not just take all the laws off of everything. I'm hoping that once this gets knocked out, and I'm not looking to kick these people anywhere, they can live in their trailer as far as I'm concerned. But if they have trash outside their trailer, I'm coming. I'm enforcing that. So this isn't that I'm weak on nuisance abatement by any means. So.
Okay. Planning, Lori, did you have a comment? Your box lit up for a second.
Oh, well, I don't really have a comment, but we did, before the ADUs came about, we did have the temporary mobile home placement permit, and it was often referred to as the hardship case. Some of the reasons were like you had an elderly parent and needed them to stay on the same property, or you were maybe building a house and you needed to live temporarily in a mobile home, so there's various reasons. And back to the wording hardship, I'm sure we could do a Google search for similar sounding words or meaning, or if that became a big issue.
I was just looking at the thesaurus and I didn't find any better ones right now. But that doesn't mean we can't. So.
Oh,
Right.
That's what you were physically taking off the shelf a second ago.
It's a synonym. It's synonyms.
Yeah. That's good.
Right next to her book about dangling participles and
That's right.
adverbs and.
That's good. I don't know. Again, I think we can work on the word. I'm fine with it either. It's not. I think it is. And maybe it's just in the title. There doesn't need to be any definition. It's not part of the. It's just more of a, the title to the thing. It's in the title because I think it does. I think people will give other people a little more leniency with that word, as far as in the title, as far as that there's. We're these are special circumstances. Go ahead.
And I'm feeling better about hardship now after this discussion, because again, with what you said, adding on to that, maybe if it says hardship, fewer people will do it. It won't be, oh, look, we can do that and go run out and do it. So it might actually deter people that could have other options by labeling it as a hardship.
So now am I to proceed with this, or if it's not really going to be through building, do I pass it off to someone, or what? I'm just asking because I don't know what you want me to do.
Right.
If it's not really mine, then I don't want to make too many decisions.
Right.
I think this one's a team effort between building as well as planning to get this ball rolling. We want it as simple as possible. It gives, well, code compliance is going to be a part of this. So you want to say in how this goes because Dan already said the trash is the issue. Trash has always been the issue, and the permit itself is going to be the hammer that we have.
And hopefully something in the permit language addresses, you know, you have to apply for this every year. If you don't keep your property nice, you ain't gonna get it next year. Hopefully we can use this as a dangled carrot so we don't have to take out the stick.
Right.
Thinking I kind of put something like that in there, but it's been a few weeks now.
Yeah, but I would suspect that the permit, like I would, have building work with planning, but, and again, Mochi's not on the call, and you know, we don't want to dump this on Lori, but it's likely I can't see like the administration as far as the permit and stuff. This is probably through the planning department, like it used to be, because it wasn't that when you got the temporary hardship house, that was a permit that was routed through planning, was it not, Lori? Not the building department.
Right. Well, we actually had the temporary, and it was a mobile home because the house, you know, would be temporary.
Very mobile.
And
But
for a hardship, and we're supposed
did issue
to
permits as well.
check every year, which we didn't always send out letters, but typically we were supposed to annually send out a letter. Basically, is the situation still the same, and so on and so forth. And as we were trying to check to make sure they still really needed that. And then of course, occasionally you have the person, well, yeah, my mother died, so we don't need the temporary, you know, trying to work with people to remove them and stay current or legal.
Okay.
But it did become kind of a hassle in some ways where people would invest quite a bit of money to place that second mobile home and then have to remove it. So.
Right. And again, I know this was part of the impetus for the ADU was we had those that turned into, you know, grandma had passed away 10 years ago and it was a rental and they didn't want to remove it. And so I don't see that, you know, again, we're talking about RVs here. So I don't see that level of investment. Commissioner Christopher got his pen up.
So actually two things if I can remember both. It's been up for a while. So yeah, I would say since Lynn's already dealt with it, I would recommend we keep it with her, but she partners with somebody in planning until this is officially done, and then she can pass the ball. What was the other one? Yeah, see, I should have taken notes. I'll come back to you. I'll circle back on that.
Okay.
To answer Dan's comment earlier, in the temporary placement proposal that we did type up, just, you know, to have something to work off of, we did include verbiage that the property shall be kept clean and free of debris and that the permit needs to be renewed yearly. We did add some of that in there, and I can keep that in there and expand on it however we all
I was gonna say,
decide.
can we add something about junk vehicles, junk trailers? Because what I think happens is they live in one until it gets completely destroyed, and then they bring in another one and don't want to remove the old one. So we need to have some kind of wording in there that's, you know, I don't mind multiple trailers on a property as long as they're not junk.
Right. So I made that note.
So to apply this permit, you have to remove the old one before we give you the new one or something.
Yeah. And then we also had verbiage that you need to clearly identify your property with an address so that emergency services can find you, you know, things along that line so that you're not just tucked out there, but if you call 911, they have no clue where to go.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this topic for today? Okay.
Folks, I think the hard ones are the water and the septic, and we don't know those answers yet,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
I spent probably 4 hours playing on those answers last night, checking through RCW, and came up with my interpretation, but we'll wait and see what health says.
Okay, well, we're going to move on then to our continuing discussion. We have lots of discussion today. It's a whole day of discussions regarding code compliance and nuisance abatement, has absolutely nothing to do with our early. I say facetiously. Okay, so where do you want to start us, Lynn, on this? This is certainly not a new topic.
No, it's not a new topic. I prepared some graphs, pie graphs, which I hadn't ever previously done, but it kind of helped bring some things into focus for myself and then hopefully for other people as well. It's a never ending conversation, and it's a no-win conversation. There's no good answer in its a very frustrating position, and we need to make some decisions on where are we going, what do we want to do. It's extremely expensive to do abatement, very, very expensive, and as we've experienced in the last few, then we end up owing more on that property than the property will sell for, because the cost of cleanup was an atrocious amount of money. So think outside the box, what are some options that maybe we can do to help people? Maybe again, it's back to the low income thing, and so-and-so dropped it here, but I don't have the money to get rid of it. I mean, there's so many scenarios that we deal with, and the latitude that we have right now, having a few citations and then a certificate of non-compliance, doesn't really help the whole problem. And if people say, no, you're not coming on my property, it's my property, I moved in the country for a reason, it's going to sit there like that. There's no good answer. There's no perfect solution. And I know we keep bringing it up and over and over and over again to discuss it, but it's something that my department unfortunately gets to deal with each and every week. And it's frustrating for the people who have complained to not see anything done. They feel like we are not doing what we're saying we're going to do. And then I get frustrated because I would like very much to fix it, and I can't because it's expensive, or we run into obstacles with land use laws or whatever the case may be. And then I've also frustrated the people who I've contacted because they're frustrated that we contacted them. They're not happy that we contacted them. So then we're stuck in the middle as the county, making nobody happy and going nowhere. And so here it sits, and it feels like it's a never ending cycle. And I don't really want to refill Frank's position until we know where we're going, because it's not fair to bring a brand new person into that position without having a clear directive of what is it that person's supposed to do. I would like very much that, maybe we take in the complaint and give it to the proper department who understands that subject matter. As it is, Frank or whomever had the job before him, you take the complaint and you go to this department and they tell you what you need to tell the person who has the violation. And there's a lot of back and forth and going around, when it would perhaps be quicker that, okay, if it's land use, then that's planning. And if it's, sanitation, that's health. And you take out the middleman, or make it be an independent department that's not funneled through building, since it tackles a whole lot more than just building code. Maybe half of the complaints actually have to do with building code. The rest aren't necessarily building code related, but it all comes through the building department, and we're getting busier and busier, and it's getting harder and harder to properly address this portion of the department. And I'm sure there's a lot more to say, but
Okay. All right. Thoughts from folks as far as what?
You're both just gonna sit there and make me talk first anyway.
No,
So
No,
my idea,
I've talked on this for 15 years, so I know where I'm at.
I know. I've sat in a few meetings where you've talked on this. I really want to look in for the reason abatement is so expensive is because until really, really recently, at least here locally, we have not had a local abatement company. There's no competition. So what would take two guys 2 days, they fill out a bid for 50 grand, and we either take it or leave it. If there was competition, that price would come way down. The city of Goldendale just abated a property in a local new organization. I think they paid 12 grand or 14 grand. The other bids were 50 grand. So hopefully if we actually do a few of these, there'll be somebody out there to do them. The other option is I want to look into the legalities of having our litter pickup people doing abatements. I know, well, I'm assuming that we can't have our public works people do it because it's not in their union contract to pick up trash. So my thought is with that, when we have attrition in public works, and there is low hanging fruit at the bottom of the public works employment roster, we don't fill that position. We redo that job title, add nuisance abatement into that job title, then hire, then give them back to public works. So that way, if we want to use them once or twice a year, we can go round up 8 or 12 public works guys that now have it in their new contract and use them to do our nuisance abatements. If we change it now, the union's got to sign off on it. They may or may not. When that position becomes available, if we just don't refill it, we file a new job description, then the union kind of has a say, but they really don't. So that's how you get to use your public works people and your own county employees to do it, save you a ton of money on cleanup.
Commissioner Anderson, your thoughts?
Isn't there issues if we use our own people to do it, then going after them to pay for it? That creates a conundrum. I thought I heard that at one point, that's a potential issue. But I guess the reason I wanted to bring this one up and talk about it is that we've been talking about it for 15 years, and everything that we've done, apparently nothing's worked. And we can't promise that there's going to be competition in the bidding. We can't promise that somebody's even going to be there to bid. But what we know is that it's not working. I guess so. My thought is let's take it from a different angle, and we take this position that is code compliance and we turn it into more code facilitation and trying to find the solutions to the answers. And maybe it's more permit facilitation, because I'm looking at these numbers here, and we have 164 open complaints. 38 of them are for the RV. So if we get rid of that, we've now taken a quarter of the numbers down right there. You get rid of the short-term rental complaints, we've taken another good portion down there. A big portion of this is structures, no permits or uses contrary to the permitted uses. That can be a lot of different things, and I read through it, and I can't sum it up, but a lot of these are places that people are living that are buildings that aren't permitted. And I think that getting through this person's role, it's kind of changing the mindset of what the position is helping people become compliant or as close to compliance as that we can get. to the situation. And then I see in the future that Lynn has a very good point that what's underneath her is only one piece of it. The zoning things are not under her part. Why does the person that responds to her have to be managing this? I see a lot of them that are going to be coming in the future being environmental complaints. If you look at the ones that haven't been processed, a fair number of those are complaints on the environmental side. That is highly particular information that requires background and knowledge. So the person being a facilitator then could work with the department and they could be the point of contact. But mainly it's going to be a lot of that legroom is going to have to be from the people who have the knowledge, as well as other counties. I also look at it as, we have people who've done 30 short plats in their lifetime. They're really good. They don't need any help. But we also have people that it's their very first short plat and it's probably the only short plat they're ever going to do. I look at that position by being a permit facilitator, helping shepherd people through the process, helping them understand the process, and trying to build that goodwill that way. When we talk about the waste junk vehicles, the trash, solid waste, I look at that as being the facilitator between the landowner and hopefully with our solid waste department. If it's going to cost us 60 grand to clean it up, or the people are broke, but if we can go out there and bring in, the 40-foot box and they're going to fill it with all the trash, and they're going to take ownership of it, they can keep living there, but you're going to clean it up. But I would rather spend our money that we get from the landfill cleaning it up than the abatement side of it, where in the end they're going to lose the property. And then they're going to be living in a trailer or something somewhere else. The only way I see this working is thinking outside of the box, more holistically about the situation and trying to help shepherd people through the process.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of the people that have a lot of this trash, that's who they are. They're hoarders or whatever. And whether we go clean it up or whether we drop a drop box, if they were willing to clean it up, they would have already did it. They're going to have back issues or glaucoma or gingivitis, so they can't help us. You're still going to have to put it in the dumpster. Otherwise, they would have already did it. So yes, I'm fine with the dumpster thing. I think that's a great idea. I do have a question for Lynn. The people that have the structures that aren't permitted, when we contact them and say, hey, you need a permit for this, what do? Just tell us too bad?
Some do. There are some who do that. There are some who say, oh, I had no idea it wasn't permitted. I bought it like this. And they want to become compliant. Or there's the ones who bought a special outbuilding permit and made it a house, and then they go to sell and they can't sell it because the bank's saying, yeah, no, it wasn't permitted that way. Well, then it gets corrected. A lot of those eventually will get corrected, whether it's for a refinance, a sell, new property purchase. A lot of times that's when those will get cleared up, but there's been some of them who have just plain said, too bad.
Well, I would imagine if half the list is those, if you contact them and say, hey, we have a nuisance complaint here and that ain't allowed, either that list should be darn near empty or most of those people have said too bad.
A lot of them have said too bad. There are some who are almost ready to become off that list, because that's maybe those properties have sat there that way for a while now. And there's about 5 of them who I've recently had conversations with. New people are looking at that property and they've called and said, what do I do to get this taken care of? Now that hasn't happened yet, but that's only a few of those 80. Most of them are the people saying, too bad I'm living here.
Are these 80s are these actual normal, everyday, middle income mom and pop people that could pay a fine even though they don't want to? Or are these people that you issue a fine, they couldn't pay it if it doesn't matter what you issued?
Some of them, a few of them, I haven't looked at the percentage but there are some who, yes, they could. Yes, they could pay the fine. They just don't want to deal with it, or they didn't want to have to deal with government, period. You know, like the people who it was a special outbuilding and then somebody says, hey, they're living in it. There's a few of those. A lot of them are people who are just simply trying to make it. And so they're kind of putting up some kind of structure to be out of the weather. And yeah, it's not necessarily permitted or code compliant, but they're not wet and freezing. There's probably more of those than the other side.
Well, I think with that, I don't want to, give them $1,500 fines because they couldn't pay for it anyway. So I don't know that that's an answer. I think Jake's answer of out of the box and delivering a garbage container is the answer. It's just, I don't think you're going to get them to help. You're going to have community outreach and volunteers and that kind of idea to clean it up, or you're doing the abatement and paying for it, or having your own city workers do it.
Right, which ultimately, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, for me, since I'm the old guy here, I actually want to speak up for Lynn's department. For 15 years, this has not worked. It has worked. We've done lots of abatements. This issue really came in the last 3 or 4 years. We were doing, it wasn't that we never had a list. We certainly had a list. We were working on the list. The board, way before my time, put county resources into doing these abatements. And except for some really hardcore perennial people that no matter what you do, they are not going to be compliant, things got taken care of. What happened in the last, maybe it's been a little more than 3 or 4 years, is that couple of things happened. People became, I think, more comfortable with filing complaints, that we have seen an explosion of, if you look, and it's not because there suddenly was a lot more out of compliance stuff. It was just that people felt more comfortable filing a complaint. On top of that was the economics of it, is that we did stop. There was no local competition anymore. Nobody would bid on anything, and so they could bid. And I think what really sealed it as far as the cost was that one that we did that had the asbestos in it, and the contractor got stuck with it, and we said, no, sorry, we're not paying for that because you should have bid it as if it was, which in retrospect, maybe that wasn't such a good thing to do, because now we get bids that they assume it's a toxic waste site and it's full of asbestos and spent nuclear rods or something, and so they bid accordingly. And so we're going to have to kind of figure that out. As far as I think I've always been, I think using county staff to clean things up, as far as whether it's public works or whoever, I'm super interested in that. If we can do that, I think we're going to run into trouble with dropping off boxes for people to put their stuff in. That's gifting of public resources. I mean, maybe there's a way to do that because ultimately it's going to be cheaper than, but as far as we do that now when we abate the property, but we also have a mechanism to try to get reimbursed for that cost. I don't think we're actually, I had some discussion with the prosecutor because the issue was raised before about, well, can we, if we use crews, can we do an abatement and then can we put the lien on the property like we could if it was a third party? And because there was concerns about us doing that. I think from my discussions, I don't want to speak for him, but it appeared that as long as we could document Like we could only put a lien on for our actual costs so that we could reimburse our costs no more. When we put it out to a third party, I'm assuming and I know for some of these folks, it was highly profitable to them as far as, and so the lien includes all that profit because that's what we had to pay. And so I think in some ways it should drive down the cost. And I think we can make a legal case for being able to do a lien on the property for that. All we're doing is just reimbursing our costs, as long as we would have to really document as far as staff time and what those costs were. And that's where the number comes from. And it should be defensible. We should be able to do that. So if we kind of took the profit out of it, and I don't know, maybe, as you said, if there's a new game in town, maybe we could try some and see if we get some, but we did the last couple and we just, they're $50,000 for a couple days work. We just couldn't do that.
Well, and I think if there is a new game in town, actually talking to that new game and saying, hey, we're looking for a real abatement, but we don't want $50,000 appraisals for 20 grand. But if you get in there and find asbestos, we're going to help you,
Right.
And kind of, talk to them and not necessarily negotiate, but get a good understanding. I think your bids could come down, just having a conversation.
Right.
But
Okay.
And what Dave said, people getting more comfortable, that a lot of the complaints are,
Yeah.
well, it's been that way for 6 years. It's been that way for 20 years. Well, why now are you complaining? Because we're here. And so a lot of times we're used. I don't know how else to put that. Two neighbors don't get along and I'm going to, it's looked like that forever, but now I'm going to tell on you because you made me mad over something. Unfortunately, that happens, and they'll go find another neighbor to sign that second complaint, get that person on their side of the issue. So unfortunately, we are utilized that way. And again, that puts us in a position of now we're kind of stuck trying to fix something that I've lived here a long time, and you can drive anywhere and see old rigs and all of that. I mean, farmers do that. You might need a part off of that. I mean, that's the mentality. And rural counties are a lot of times that way. You don't throw some things away because you might need something off of it to fix something else. Seriously, so then it's always a hard point because you get someone new who's moved in. Well, look at all those vehicles, but to that person, they're like, okay, but that's not junk because I might use part of that someday. I mean, there's all these angles that we always have to look at and deal with.
we had a nuisance board of appeal or a board. What did they do? What did they do?
Honestly, it's never been utilized since I've been here.
Me either.
So they haven't been used in a long time. My understanding from before was if say we said, okay, that's junk, you need to clean it up, that they would be able to go to the nuisance board of appeals and say, I don't consider that junk. They're telling me it is junk, and that they are like a mediator to say, okay, if you line those old vehicles up neatly, we won't consider it junk. I mean, I'm not sure because we've never utilized them since I've been here.
I think that could alleviate a lot of headache with somebody ratting out their neighbor. If you had an independent organization, you might say not the county, telling that neighbor, no, that's kind of junk, you need to clean that up. Or telling this guy, hey, come on, it's 3 tractors, he's going to reuse them, go home. I don't know.
And maybe we have a board that has monthly meetings and this kind of stuff goes to a board and not handled directly from a county or one individual. I mean, I don't know, but maybe that's the approach. I know for the city, I'm on the Citizens Advisory Committee. And we have monthly or bi-monthly meetings, and issues are brought to us as that board. And then we listen to, well, this is the complaint, this is their side of the story, and we make determinations of how long are we giving them. And if they don't meet that time frame, this is what the fine will be. But it's a volunteer board who does that.
And that's what I'm thinking. If you had so the nuisance complaints came into you, or whoever we end up making this person be, if it's they got feces running down the driveway, it's not going to the nuisance board. It's going to the Board of Health. We're going to take care of this. But if we're dealing with some trash, some rubbish, a broken down RV, 3 cars, whatever, send it to the board for, their opinion. And the person making the complaint should need to come before that board and make the complaint, show their documentation.
Correct. That's how they do it at the city. Yeah, you have to be there to state your piece, and then the person who's defending their
people gone.
Right. You get both people there to give their side, and you have multiple people listening to it to make a determination.
And then if it doesn't work, it can go back to you, and then you can issue fines or us or whatever. Dave's got his hand up. Sorry, I took over, Dave.
So in this process you're describing, is that at the intake? Is that at the beginning to determine whether it's a nuisance or what, out of compliance, whatever it is? Or is this once, abatement or whatever has been decided?
So the way that I understand it from having talked to Jeff and then done my part of it is he gets a complaint in and he contacts the property owner and says, okay, this is the alleged issue. I've come out and looked at it. Yes, you've got junk, or whatever the case is. You need to get it cleaned up. If he gives them 30 days or 60 days to do it and he gets no compliance from them, then it comes to the nuisance board of appeals at the city level. And then we all listen to it. And Jeff says, okay, this complaint was made. I saw it. Yes, there was a whole lot of junk. They cleaned up barely any, or they didn't clean up any at all. And then it's up to discussion of how do we as the board think it should be taken care of, or to try to help that person mediate the problem of, okay, I'll get this cleaned up, or I'll license this vehicle, or whatever the case is.
So how is that? I mean, that's basically our process now. As far as the complaint gets made, it's an allegation gets made, staff goes and investigates, comes up, interacts with the person. If nothing's happening, then that case comes to the Board of Commissioners. We're the review body, and we authorize, yeah, you're right, this meets, they got so much, and we've done where we try to come up with some solutions of how to do it, but ultimately, the hammer is they're not doing anything or not doing it fast enough. We authorize abatement, go take care of it, do it.
But then that's where the problem starts is, we can send the letters, we can talk to the people, some comply, some don't. When they don't, we come to the board. Yes, that's a nuisance, we need to take care of it. But then that's where the stall occurs, because if we do the citations, okay, then we have to go to court, and that's an expense and a time, and they may or may not get waived, and they may or may not be given more time. Or if it says, yes, we're going to abate, then how do we abate? Because the cost is expensive. Or yes, that's a nuisance and they won't let me on the property, but I can't get an administrative warrant to go on the property either. I mean, there's just so many angles that on that side of it aren't working. It's good up to a point, and then that's where the bottleneck occurs, in my opinion.
But isn't the real bottleneck just financial resources? I mean, the whole issue is we can fix all the problems. I mean, we go through the process. Yeah, it's a mess. It needs to be cleaned up. You go out, you give them a certain amount of time to do it, which we've been really generous in that because we hate doing it. We don't. Exactly. I don't want anybody's property and clean up their mess and and go in there. But ultimately, you know, if we want to have a quicker, streamlined, take care of it, there's no problem. It just takes money. That's been the problem.
Yeah,
like
and that's the problem.
It was. I mean, we said we did some of those where we wanted to make an example. I'm thinking in Dallasport with some of these that we did. We spent big bucks and we dealt with it. We went and cleaned it all up. These are perennial ones where they just went somewhere
They
else.
mess it up again.
They just messed it up again. Same property.
Yeah.
We've abated properties multiple times, but for the most, for a lot of them, it did work. But it's really about resources as far as, because our final hammer that we have is a big bluff, because we haven't actually followed through. And people know that. It's like, yeah, you say you're going to abate it, but you're not actually going to do it because you don't want to put all that money into it. And so if we have a way that we can get the costs down, where it's something that we can actually make some investments in and do it, I think it will work again, like it used to work. But the thing that really bottlenecked it up was we can do one abatement a year now instead of 3 or 4. Yes.
Well, look at the price of an abatement and then said, what's the absolute worst case scenario if we hired 2 county employees, that your job was abatement 365. You moved from this job to this job to this job to this job. We'd probably still get it cheaper hiring 2 full-time employees.
Right.
And then what we have to pay somebody. So if we can get the contracts reworked that they can go shovel in a road, but come over here once in a while, I think that's the best financial way to go. Because now you dangled the carrot, the stick is within financial, in the budget.
And
Yeah.
that works for the cleanup part, but maybe not necessarily some of the other stuff of, say, a failed septic system or a complaint because they've cut down trees along the white salmon or something. We still have those angles that we would have to figure out as well. Building without a permit, eventually I end up dealing with and taking care of, because when they want to sell or get it refinanced or what have you, they end up getting it permitted eventually.
Yeah, I don't know what you would do for fines if somebody, cleared all the vegetation off the side of their property right next to the White Salmon River, and you got to have that buffer, or I don't know what you would do ecology-wise. We'd put that on Jake's desk and Jake can fix it.
Right. I like that idea.
Well, and I think that's Department of Ecology a lot of the times as
Right.
well.
They're the ones with the hammer on that. As far as the building permit part of it, yeah, those generally, we have a lot more hammers in that, because they will eventually going to want to refinance or sell their property, and they gotta come play, and those generally get fixed. Or you end up with a certificate of non-compliance, and it gets filed in the public record. And because we've done that with folks where we just could not settle it. We just couldn't. They're not going to do it. We can't make them do it. I can't make you go in and have an engineer certify your foundation. I'm not going to kick you out of your house because you didn't do that. But I am going to go file in the public record so that when you go to sell your house, the next person knows, oh, that foundation was never inspected, and they know that, and that reduces their potential sale capacity by about 95%. And they're like, oh, what do I need to do? And if
Exactly.
they can sell to a guy that doesn't mind, that doesn't care, it's a private sale, I don't care. That's no business of mine. But that's an easier piece of it. It's usually it's the cleaning up the and even those actually, like the junk and garbage, that's relatively easy, because it's like we get no fights about that. It's like, that we've all driven by houses that it's like, yeah, that needs abated, and I don't really get any pushback from the public if we go out and take care of it. I'm going to get pushback if I'm kicking grandma out of her house because she didn't get her foundation, an engineer to certify her foundation. That's not going to go anywhere. But
yeah, so I mean, I'd like to revamp it in the sense of, I deal with what I deal with.
Right.
I'll deal with the permit stuff, and maybe it's a completely independent department person, whatever, that kind of deals with the rest of it. You know, simply because it's a lot bigger, or it feels a lot bigger now than when it was first drafted, you know, 15, 20 years ago.
Right. I'd be interested in that, because I really do think that it, you know, looking at the volume of stuff and where this all comes from, I don't see any reason why it has to be in your department. I think the department, I think maybe we need like a liaison person. You said a lot of this stuff, if we have somebody that can work with folks, which, you know, the code compliance officer has, that's been part of their job, but it doesn't have to be, the building department that's handling it. You should handle the stuff that are building department stuff. Planning should should be working with this person, or public health if it's, broken wastewater, whatever it is. And then I do think we should explore we have some county staff that can kind of provide the manpower for, especially the cleanup, litter cleanup, that kind of stuff. Commissioner Christopher.
Agree with all of that in having the departments do their thing, but whoever the new nuisance compliance officer is, we need to make sure it's in their contract that they're also picking up and putting it in the dumpster.
Right.
Take advantage of every contract we sign with a new employee.
Okay. Actually, I'll visit. I have a call later with Rob, Human Resources. I'm curious what his thinking. I don't want to say what
I've discussed this with him already, so he's got a head start.
Okay. As far as that with the union contracts, as far as if you could rewrite some new positions that had that option. Because I think the maintenance tech guys that's not in their job description now. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it if we asked them to do it.
Right, and that's kind of what he said. The union would have to talk to them and say, okay, yeah, we'll allow it. But if we're creating a new job description
that includes that,
the union's got a lot less input. So that's what I'm saying. If you're hiring via attrition, when somebody drops out, don't just rehire them. Here's a new job description.
Okay.
I don't know that we'll ever fix all of this always, but some of it. Jake? You're muted, Jake.
You're muted somewhere, Jake.
If it's not under Lynn's department, where's this person going to be housed? I mean, if it's not underneath Lynn, then they're going to respond directly to us, and they're going to be a department head. I mean, at what pay scale are we going to have these people there? And so that's just something to think about. Is do we need one person that comes in and we have to do their annual review versus being underneath Lynn or somebody else?
But if it's predominantly trash, maybe it's a solid waste thing or something like that. I don't know. I mean, everybody's busy, so, but it's difficult to do the pieces that aren't building code related. It's very tricky for myself.
That's my thinking. If building's handled from her and health department is handling the health issues, most of what's left is trash. So I would think it would either need to be under solid waste, or the sheriff has already talked possibility of taking it. That gives the guy who's showing up to your house to look at the garbage a badge. Maybe not a gun, but a badge, and might give him a little more bite when he's dangling his carrot. Either one of those, I think, is where it would need to have to go.
Okay, I'll have to think that through, because that's okay. Next steps on this. I'm gonna let this just languish, because I know you want, we're COVID is going to be over eventually, and we are going to restart code compliance and everything. And
now that it's a separate title, it can be written however we need it to be rewritten, and it won't affect my building code verbiage which is helpful because now it's its own XX, Title XX. But it can be rewritten however the county needs it to be rewritten.
Okay. What I'm going to suggest to my seatmates is let's revisit this on Tuesday next week and see what kind of direction, because I got a few things I got to think through myself. I don't want to, as far as like a proposal, come back with something. Can we do that? Leah, I see you're on, I mean, obviously you're on there. We haven't done our schedule yet. Right.
Yes, your schedule is done already, Commissioner.
And I'm not available Tuesday afternoon.
You're not available?
If you want me there, I'm not available on the 16th. I would be on the 23rd.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, the schedule was done as of 10 o'clock this afternoon, so, but it could always go under for pending. But if Lynn's not going to be available, we could definitely do it on the 23rd.
Well, what I would suggest is the board can have a discussion on Tuesday under board pending and see if we can get things. And then we'll schedule some more time with Lynn on the 23rd, and we can have so we kind of know what our game plan is. That way we can have a discussion. We don't really need, it's just, I think we need to make sure we understand what direction we want to go. And then we'll start taking action on the 23rd with you.
Yeah, and if Lynn's not gonna be here next week, we can all decide to keep it in her department and she won't
Yeah,
defend
absolutely.
herself, so.
No. Please don't.
Yeah, just like Mochi almost got the whole thing because she was gone.
Don't show up, you're it.
Yeah, unless you're on, you're in. That's right. Okay, is that good with my seatmates? Does that seem like a plan? We're okay with that? All right. Anything else before we go? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's nothing wrong with that.
Jake, did you watch the Bridge Committee video? I didn't see you on it, but did you watch the 3-hour meeting they had a week ago?
I was on it.
Yeah, okay, because I watched it, they recorded it and aired it online or whatever, and I watched it last night. And about 20 minutes into it, I wanted to make sure that next time I saw you, I apologized for having you on that board. But that was a very long, interesting meeting.
Dave definitely won on that one.
And
So
I would
yes,
like
yeah,
to,
my apologies.
No, I got as good as I gave, so it's all right.
no, I say thanks for the good discussions today.
All right.
Hopefully you're leaving knowing which direction we want you to go.
On two things, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this one we haven't decided, so.
Third one, we're not there yet. That's
We're
right.
getting there though. Hey, we're
We're
making progress.
We're making progress.
Dave threw in the towel
Yeah.
and wanted to quit early. It's only 3 o'clock.
Dan,
Yeah.
what do you think about that P3 public-private partnership? Do you see any validity in that? I was sitting there trying to key into where their profit margin is, and I think I found it, and I don't exactly love it.
It scares me. I'm with you. I don't exactly love it. I can tell you I watched like an hour and then I started skimming, so I would hate to officially comment without officially watching the whole thing. Because I was kind of yawning and you could see people leaving. I don't know, it's interesting.
I would be curious because I've been through it once before. I didn't go, I'll go back and watch it, but I've had the thing before. So I'm curious Jake, what you thought, because that's always been I couldn't seem to make it work, their profit. Like there's something missing as to why it's like if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And so
that's me. I didn't want to say that, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm leading on it too.
Because otherwise
And
it's like, no brainer. Let's do that. It's they'll take care of it. It's cheaper. They're saying,
It's faster. Let's just get it done.
Let's
Next thing
get
you
it
know, you have
done.
$30 tolls.
But except it'll be right. It's the only way the margins work, even over a period of time. Because I know granted, private could build it for significantly cheaper than a public bridge could. I get that. But even factoring that in, I don't see them getting a return on their investment in what they're looking for unless those tolls escalate over time. Granted, it's over time, but you've got to get up pretty damn high for them to be able to get a return.
I think a lot of that
private money.
A lot of that is going to be the board, Jake's board, looking at talking to other cities, other states that have had this done, not just the companies trying to sell us something.
Right.
And talk to those municipalities and see where they're at from the bridge they had done 10 years ago.
So I guess I see it, and there were two different companies, Dave, that gave presentations. One of them was a company that builds the bridges themselves and designs it, and they manage it. The other company was in the business of finding 10% financing, and then they're more like project managers that allow them to go out and do it. But you raised it about 2 basis points. They put about 10% equity in, but it raises it 2 basis points, per year. And so really they're making about 10% ROI for managing it every year for 30 years. It's a pretty good gig on their 10% investment,
right,
on top of what they get paid for managing it. So yeah, I see it there, but my first thought is for what they're putting in, and most of the dollars is coming from somewhere else, I could go hire somebody for $100,000 to do that facilitation in the beginning, in order to get it. We're already spending a lot of money keeping, somebody managing this project. And you saw what the FEIS is costing, and it's like, we're already just, if once you've decided you're going to do it, just go do it. And yeah, it scares me a lot having these private companies have a good handhold over what that toll is going to be. Because when I'm working it out, I mean, on their 2 basis points, that's based on how many trips, that's an extra $4 per trip going just to them.
Right.
That hurts. That's just their portion.
Yeah, I just don't works without having the tolls being way out of line from what we want or what the region will can do. People, I'm not spending $5 to go across the Hood River Bridge each way. And
I'm thinking it's closer to 8 to 10.
I know but they're like, oh no, we can. Well, we're going to do it, and it's only going to be $2. And then with these inflators, it's like, that doesn't work. It won't work.
I'm already
numbers.
7.
Yeah.
You're talking about $2. I'm at 7. You go to 5, I'll be 25.
Yeah.
Because I have 2 tires in the back of my truck.
You had to have those 2
I feel like stopping at the bridge and taking the lug nuts off, throwing them in the truck, driving across on 4 tires, and then bolting them suckers back up again.
Would be worth it. You could be like the pit crew, I bet you could get real.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, without significant federal funding, as well as state funding, I don't see how this is ever going to get done. I mean, that's just all that. And we can design it. But I can tell you what, I love that bridge. It keeps a lot of people away.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, we're good, I guess. Thanks, Lynn, and
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
folks
Lynn.
on the call, and I'll see y'all next week.
Thank you.